The water holds you. That is the first thing you notice. Before anything else, before the light, before the silence, before the faint and ancient smell of salt that has no name in any language yet spoken. The water holds you the way sleep holds you at its deepest edge, with a pressure that is not quite pressure and a warmth that is not quite warmth. You are suspended. You are between one thing and another. You are exactly where you are meant to be. There is no surface above you that you can see. Or rather, there is somewhere, very far above, there is a place where light enters this world from outside it, but from where you drift now, that boundary is only a suggestion, a slow brightening in a particular direction, a shimmer that comes and goes as clouds move over a sun that has not yet been named. There is no one to name it. There is no one to name anything. That is perhaps the most important thing to hold in your mind as you settle into this place and this time. Nothing here has a name. The sea around you has no name. The creatures moving through it have no name. The light has no name. Even the deep geological pressure that built these shallow, warm waters across what will one day be called the interior of a continent that does not yet exist, that pressure has no name either. There is only the thing itself, present and complete, needing nothing from language to be fully real. You are drifting. That is enough. The year, if one could call it that, the point along the long river of deep time, is approximately 80 million years before a particular species of primate will develop the habit of counting such things. 80 million years is a number that means almost nothing to a human mind in the ordinary way of things. It is too large to feel. But you do not need to feel its size right now. You only need to let it expand around you like the water itself, like the slow, warm dark, until you are small inside it, in a way that is not frightening but restful. To be small inside something enormous and ancient is, it turns out, one of the quieter pleasures available to a mind willing to let go. Let go, then. The water is warm, the light is soft. Something large and unhurried moves past you in the middle distance, too far away to see clearly, close enough to feel as a gentle shift in the current against your skin. It has not noticed you. It does not need to. You are not part of its world in any way that matters to it. You are only a witness, drifting, watching a world that asked no one's permission to exist and needed no one's approval to be beautiful. This is where we begin. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this one, consider subscribing. New stories arrive every week, and the next one will be waiting when you return. You are somewhere in the middle of a sea that does not yet know it is a sea. It covers the heart of what will become a great continent. It stretches from what will become a cold northern coast to what will become a warm southern gulf. A vast inland ocean hundreds of miles across and, in places, barely a few hundred feet deep, shallow enough for light to reach the bottom in certain places, deep enough in others that the bottom is a question the light has stopped asking. It is warm. It is alive with a kind of aliveness so dense and layered and unhurried that your mind, if you let it, will simply dissolve into it, like salt dissolving into the water you are already floating in. This sea has a name in the books of the future. Geologists will call it the Western Interior Seaway, and they will spend long, careful decades reconstructing its shape from the rocks it left behind, the limestone and shale and chalk deposited so slowly and so thoroughly that even now, 80 million years later, if you drive across the flat middle of the North American continent and stop and pick up a piece of pale stone from a roadside cut, you may be holding the compressed remains of something that once swam through the water around you. That chalk, those compressed shells, that fine pale sediment, it is all still there. It went nowhere. It simply became the ground. But right now, in the time you have settled into, none of that compression has happened. The sediment is still floating. It drifts in thin pale clouds near the bottom, stirred by slow currents and by the passage of things that move through this water with a confidence born of tens of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The water itself is warmer than any ocean you have ever swum in. The global climate in this period is what scientists of the future will call greenhouse conditions. There are no permanent ice caps at either pole. The planet breathes out carbon in a long, slow exhalation that began before your species existed and will continue long after it is gone. And the result is a world several degrees warmer than the one you know. The polar regions have forests. The tropics are very nearly too warm for large animals to live in, and in the middle latitudes, This shallow inland sea absorbs the warmth and holds it and radiates it back into the air above, creating a ribbon of mild, humid, sea-softened climate across the center of a landmass that is still moving, still drifting on the slow conveyor of the tectonic plates, still becoming something. You are drifting in the middle of that ribbon. The water is perhaps 27 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature of a warm bath drawn by someone who knew what they were doing. It holds the heat in a way that makes your boundaries feel uncertain. Where your skin ends and the water begins is a question you do not particularly need answered. The salt content is lower than the open ocean, fed by rivers draining from the western mountains and from the low flat eastern lands, and so the water has a softness that the deep ocean does not, a gentleness that matches the light filtering down from above. That light, let yourself look up toward it now. Above you, the surface of the sea catches the afternoon sun and fragments it into 10,000 separate pieces, each one shifting and dissolving and becoming another, a slow, brilliant puzzle that assembles and disassembles itself continuously without ever resolving into a final form. You have watched light behave this way before, through the surface of a swimming pool, through the window of a boat, through the side of a glass aquarium. But here the scale is different. Here the light falls across miles of open water and filters down through a column of warm living liquid and arrives at your depth already changed, already softened, already stripped of its urgency. It arrives as something close to amber. It arrives as something close to the light that comes under a door when someone you love is still awake in the next room. Below you, the bottom is visible in some places, invisible in others. Where it is visible, it is pale and soft, a landscape of fine carbonate sediment decorated with the slow architecture of creatures that build their homes by secreting calcium from the water around them. Ammonites have left their spiral cases half buried in the silt. Bivalves of many sizes open and close their shells with the unhurried patience of things that have never needed to hurry. Small fish move in loose formations just above the bottom, their scales catching and releasing the filtered light in brief silver announcements, there and gone and there again. Around you, at your level, the water is not empty. It is never empty here. Life in this sea is not scattered or sparse. It is present in the way that weather is present, the way that silence is present in a room full of sleeping people, not as an absence but as a texture, a density, a quality of the air that you feel before you identify its source. Something passes to your left at a distance of perhaps 30 feet, its body long and smooth and darker than the water around it. It does not hurry. It moves the way a thought moves through a mind that is close to sleep, not urgently, not with direction, but with a kind of inevitable drift that carries it from one moment to the next without effort. You watch it go. Above you, far above, where the surface of the sea catches the light, you can just make out the shadows of larger things, shapes that move with a different quality of motion, purposeful and slow, breaking the surface occasionally in a way that sends rings of disruption spreading outward across the skin of the water, rings that reach your depth as the faintest pulse, the gentlest nudge, a reminder that the surface exists even from here. And beyond the surface, beyond the ceiling of this warm world, above the water and the air and the clouds that drift across a sky no one has ever described, there is a continent beginning to divide itself. There are mountains building themselves along what will become a western coast. There are rivers carrying the memory of those mountains down to this sea, in the form of sediment and minerals, and the particular shade of blue-green that river water adds to salt water when they meet. There are forests of cycads and ferns, and the first flowering trees, just beginning to find their footing in a world that had, until recently, never seen a flower. There are dinosaurs moving through those forests, living their enormous patient lives, eating and resting and watching the world with eyes that have never held a concept of what they are or where they exist in the history of living things. But none of that is where you are. Where you are is here, below the surface, in the warm amber light, in the water that holds you as gently as the first moments of sleep. Let yourself settle deeper. The light is enough. The warmth is enough. Everything you need is already here, already moving slowly around you, already at rest. Let yourself drift lower now. Not all the way to the bottom, not yet, but closer. Close enough that the floor of this ancient sea begins to resolve from suggestion into something you can study, something that rewards the kind of slow, unhurried attention that the surface world rarely permits. The bottom here is not hard. That is the first thing to understand. In the open ocean, you know from your own time, the deep sea floor can be stony and cold and geologically ancient, rock worn smooth by millions of years of slow current. But this is a shallow inland sea, and its floor is soft in the way that the floor of a sleeping mind is soft-yielding, accepting, built up over time from the accumulation of small things. It is composed almost entirely of calcium carbonate, the mineral remains of countless organisms that lived in the water above, and when they died, settled to the bottom like snow, like the snow of a world that never gets cold enough for frozen water, but produces instead a continuous, gentle fall of organic matter, shell fragments, microscopic tests, the compressed bodies of things too small to see individually, but present in numbers so vast that their collective weight, over time, builds a landscape. This is chalk, or rather, this is chalk in the process of becoming. The chalky white cliffs that will one day face the sea in certain northern European countries, the ones that poets of your time will write about, that navigators will use as landmarks, that children will press against their palms to draw pale lines on dark stone. All of that chalk is being made right now, in seas like this one, by the patient and unconscious labour of creatures that have never been asked their opinion about it. Coccolithophores. That is their name in the language of the future, a name given to them by scientists who will study them under microscopes and marvel at the elaborate geometric plates of calcium carbonate each microscopic organism builds around itself. Each plate is a disc, a shield, a tiny wheel of crystallized mineral that fits together with others to form a spherical case around a cell smaller than any object you have ever been able to see with unaided eyes. They are here now, in uncountable billions, drifting in the sunlit upper waters above you, each one building its calcium armor, living its brief and purposeful life, and then falling, always falling. The sea floor is built on their falling. The landscape you are now approaching is made of them. Consider for a moment what that means, not as a scientific fact to be catalogued and filed, but as something to feel. The floor of this sea is a monument built from the lives of organisms invisible to the naked eye. Each individual contributed nothing measurable. No single coccolithophore changed the floor of the sea in any detectable way. But across billions of years, across quadrillions of individual organisms, across a patience so vast that the human mind can describe it only in approximations, the accumulated effect is a landscape, a world, a place where you can rest. The most magnificent things are often built this way, not through single grand acts, but through the endless repetition of small ones, each one sufficient in itself, none of them requiring recognition. Move closer still. Let your eyes adjust to the filtered light down here, which is dimmer but still present, still amber, still soft, still carrying something of the warmth it gathered at the surface. The bottom is perhaps 20 feet below you now. You can see its texture. It is pale and slightly uneven, not smooth but not dramatically irregular, either a gentle undulation, as if the floor of the sea is sleeping the same way you are sleeping, breathing slowly in and out across a distance of miles, rising here by a foot and falling there by two, creating a landscape of subtle hills and valleys that the water fills but does not flatten. In the valleys, things collect. Sediment accumulates more thickly in the low places, and in the sediment, buried to various depths, are the remains of things that once lived and fell and were not fully dissolved before they reached the bottom. You can see the curled edge of an ammonite shell protruding from the pale silt, just the outer coil of it, the rest buried. But that visible portion is enough to read the story. The shell is about the size of a dinner plate, its surface ribbed in regular ridges that catch the light in alternating bands of brightness and shadow. It is beautiful in the way that mathematics is beautiful. The pattern is exact, the repetition is precise, the form obeys a logic that your eye recognizes before your mind has named it. Ammonites are the great inhabitants of this sea, the creatures whose remains will most define its character in the fossil record that waits in the far future. They are cephalopods, relatives of the squid and octopus and nautilus that your own time still holds, but they are not those things. They are something older, something more, something that has been refining its basic design for more than 300 million years by the time you drift past it now. The coiled shell is a float, a ballast chamber, a device for controlling buoyancy so precisely that the animal inside it can hover at a chosen depth without effort. Neutrally buoyant, suspended by its own architecture in the same way that you are suspended now by the warmth and density of the water around you. The one whose shell is half buried here is dead. It died some weeks or months or perhaps years ago. Time is difficult to track in this place, where nothing changes season by season, the way things change in the world of air and land. When it died, the soft body inside the shell decomposed, and the shell, left empty, sank through the water column at the speed that an empty shell sinks, which is very slowly, tumbling a little as it fell, arriving at the bottom with the quietness of all things that arrive at their final resting place without drama. Now the sediment is reclaiming it. In 10,000 years the shell will be completely buried. In 10 million years the sediment around it will begin to compress, to lithify, to transform under pressure and time into the rock that geologists will quarry and study and name. And somewhere inside that named rock the ghost of this exact spiral will persist, preserved in perfect mineral detail, waiting for someone to find it and hold it up to the light and wonder. But that is the future. Here, now, the shell is still visible, the light still reaches it, the water still moves across it in gentle eddies created by things passing above. Look more carefully at the sediment around the buried ammonite. The pale floor is not as uniform as it first appears. There are small mounds, each perhaps a centimetre tall, the work of burrowing organisms, worms and small crustaceans, and creatures without common names, working the sediment the way earthworms work soil, turning it over in the slow biological process that mixes the layers and distributes the oxygen and keeps the sediment from going anoxic and inhospitable. The mounds have tiny openings at their tops, just visible in the amber light, entrances to tunnels that descend through the sediment to depths far greater than their modest surface architecture suggests. Whole communities of organisms live in those tunnels, in the spaces between the grains of carbonate sediment, in the chemistry of the interstitial water that fills those spaces. The floor of the sea is not just a surface, it is a world, with its own depth and its own ecology and its own slow biology. Something moves along the bottom, 20 feet below you. It is a fish, small, keeping close to the sediment, its coloration pale and sandy to match the floor it travels along. It moves in short bursts, a few quick fin strokes forward, then a pause, hovering just above the sediment, then another burst. It is hunting the small crustaceans that live on and in the sediment surface, detecting them through some combination of sight and the pressure sensitivity of its lateral line system, and perhaps the chemical signatures the crustaceans leak into the water above them. It is a very small predator in a sea full of very large ones, and its survival depends on this combination of camouflage and caution, and the ability to find food in the margins where the large predators do not bother to look. Something is passing above you now. Look up. The silhouette against the lighter water is long and finned, roughly the size of a large dolphin, its body streamlined in the way that bodies become streamlined when they spend enough generations in water, not because anyone planned it, but because the water itself is the teacher, and it teaches through the simple arithmetic of which shapes survive and which do not. This creature is a mosasaur of middle size. There are many kinds of mosasaur in this sea, from animals barely larger than a dog to things that stretch 12 meters from their blunt, powerful heads to the tips of their vertically flattened tails. This one is somewhere in the middle of that range, perhaps 4 meters long, moving at the comfortable pace of an animal that is neither hunting with urgency nor fleeing with fear, but simply traveling, covering ground, the way a mind covers ground in a dream purposefully, but without the pressure of a destination. It does not look down. You are not interesting to it. You are the wrong size and the wrong shape, and you carry none of the chemical signatures that this animal's senses are tuned to detect and evaluate. Its tongue forked, like the tongue of a lizard, which is what its ancient ancestors were, flickers out into the water, tasting the currents, reading the chemical story the water carries from every direction simultaneously. The story it reads does not include you. You are transparent here, invisible in the way that dreams are invisible to the dreamer until the dreamer wakes. Watch it move past. The tail sweeps in a slow lateral arc, the way a large fish's tail sweeps, side to side rather than up and down, the signature of an animal descended from land-dwelling ancestors rather than born in water. The paddles that were once feet move against the water in gentle corrections, keeping the body level, adjusting for the slight variations in density and current that the open water presents to anything trying to move through it gracefully. There is something almost lazy in its movement, something that speaks of complete confidence in this environment, of an animal that has never needed to be afraid of this water, because this water is simply home. It rounds the edge of your vision and is gone. Where it passed, the water moves in slow spirals that take several minutes to fully dissipate, long after the animal itself has disappeared. The water holds the memory of motion longer than the air does. In the air, a bird's passage leaves a turbulence that is gone in seconds. Here, the wake persists, the water moving in gentle circles that slowly widen and slow and eventually return to the ambient drift of the current, as if the sea is breathing out after holding its breath for the duration of the mosasaur's passage. You are still near the bottom. A small crab-like creature moves across the sediment 20 feet below, pulling itself forward on its many small legs with an efficiency that makes even the unhurried pace of large animals above it seem rushed. The crab has no awareness of the mosasaur that just passed overhead. It has no awareness of you. Its entire world is the few square feet of sediment in front of its eyes, and the chemical information its antennae pull from the water directly above the surface of the sea floor. This tiny, complete world bounded, self-contained, requiring no knowledge of the vast sea above it is not a lesser world for being small. It is the full world, experienced fully by a creature perfectly suited to experience it exactly this way. The ammonite shell is below you, the sediment pale and soft, the light amber and decreasing as the angle of the sun above the surface shifts imperceptibly in the direction of evening. Evening here does not announce itself loudly. There is no reddening of the sky, no long shadows thrown across an open plain. Evening here is a slow greying of the water above, a lessening of the light that enters from outside, a gradual shift from amber to something darker and more private. The creatures of the seafloor respond to this shift in ways so subtle they are almost invisible. A slowing of movement here, a closing of shells there, a settling into the sediment of things that prefer to rest when the light fades. You drift with them. There is no urgency here. There is only the water, and the light that is slowly gentling, and the soft and ancient world arranging itself around you in the patient way. It has been arranging itself for millions of years before you arrived and will continue to arrange itself for millions of years after you have drifted back to, wherever it is that dreamers go when a dream has finished with them. Rest here for a while. The bottom is close. The light is soft. Nothing is asking anything of you. The ammonite shell still catches a little of the fading light, the ribbed outer coil holding a thin line of bronze in the growing dusk of the evening water. That thin line of bronze is one of the last things the light touches before it retreats entirely into the upper water for the night. It is a small thing to see. It is a sufficient thing to see. You do not need more than this. The quiet sea floor, the fading amber, the ancient shell resting in the sediment where it has been resting for weeks or months, waiting for the millions of years of transformation that will carry it from here to the rock of the future without moving it an inch. Nothing here moves quickly. Nothing here needs to. The sea has arranged itself into a state of profound adequacy, and you are part of that arrangement now, drifting at the bottom of it, as unhurried as the chalk, as patient as the buried shell, as deep and warm and still as the ancient water that has been holding everything here without effort since long before this morning. Rise again now, slowly. Let the bottom fall away beneath you as you drift upward into the open water column, back into the amber middle zone where the light is richer and the world is more populated, and the currents move with a kind of purposefulness that the still water near the bottom does not share. This is the pelagic zone, though no one here knows to call it that. It is the open water, the zone of swimming things, the world between the surface and the floor that is neither one nor the other, but belongs entirely to the creatures that have learned to inhabit it. And it is full. It is extraordinarily, overwhelmingly, quietly full. You are aware of this fullness, not all at once, but gradually, the way you become aware of the sound of rain, first as a background, then as a texture, then as something so present, it becomes the thing itself rather than an addition to something else. The water around you is alive in every direction. Small fish in silver schools shift and turn as one, each member responding to the movements of the others with a speed and accuracy that makes the whole school seem like a single organism, a single mind expressed in 50 bodies that move through the water in perfect unison, banking left and then folding back on themselves in a gesture that has no purpose. You can identify except the gesture itself, except the sheer pleasure, perhaps, of being many bodies that move like one. The schools of fish are everywhere. They are not all the same. Some are the size of sardines, small and quick and silver. Others are larger, moving with less urgency, cruising through the middle water with the confidence of fish that have fewer predators to avoid. They pass through you, through your space, through the volume of water you occupy without acknowledging your presence, pressing the water around you into brief turbulences as they go, leaving behind the faintest chemical trace of their passage, a trail of dissolved substances that the more sensitive inhabitants of this sea will read and interpret and respond to long after the fish themselves have moved on. But the fish are not the most numerous creatures here. They are among the most visible, the most immediately recognizable to eyes trained on the fish of your own time, but they are not the most numerous. The most numerous things in this sea are things you cannot easily see. The plankton, the microscopic and near-microscopic organisms that drift in the sunlit upper waters and in the dimmer middle waters below, living their complete lives at a scale that requires instruments to perceive. They are here in numbers that make the concept of number meaningless. In a single litre of this water, there may be millions of them. In the entire volume of the Western Interior Seaway, stretched across what will become the heart of a continent, the number of individual organisms is so large that the only honest response to it is silence. They are the base of everything. The fish that school around you feed on the larger plankton. The larger creatures that feed on the fish are fed in turn by the fish that fed on the plankton, and the plankton feed on the light that falls from above and the minerals that well up from below and on each other in a chain of eating and being eaten that turns sunlight into flesh and flesh into sediment and sediment eventually into rock. Everything in this sea is in the process of becoming something else. That is, in fact, the definition of being alive. Spend a moment simply floating in the middle of a school. Let the fish move around you and through you and past you in their silver hundreds. The experience is not alarming. You are still the transparent presence, the uncategorizable anomaly that the fish register as neutral and pass by without adjustment. But you can feel the water they displace, the brief, gentle pressures as each body pushes the water aside in the course of its movement, the slight turbulence that each tail generates and then leaves behind. The school is not silent. It produces sound, not the sounds you can hear, but pressure variations that move through the water at the speed of sound and reach your imagined body as a continuous low-level hum, the hum of 10,000 simultaneous small swimming movements, adding up to a barely perceptible signature that, if you were a large predator sensitive enough to detect it, would announce the school's presence from hundreds of meters away. The large predators do detect it. That is why the schools exist not despite the predators, but because of them. Schooling behavior evolved as a defense against predation, and it works because of a mathematical reality. In a school of 1,000 fish, any individual fish has a 1 in 1,000 chance of being the one selected by any given predator attack. Outside the school, alone in the open water, an individual fish becomes entirely conspicuous, entirely vulnerable, with no other bodies to confuse the predator's targeting. The school is a collective insurance policy, and it works well enough to have been the dominant social strategy of small fish in open water for hundreds of millions of years. Something comes toward you from the upper water now. It descends toward you at a measured pace, and as it resolves out of the lighter water above into the amber zone where you drift, you see that it is an ammonite, a living one this time, not the empty shell you saw below. It is smaller than the one buried in the sediment, perhaps the size of a large dinner plate, its coiled shell gleaming with the iridescent quality that living cephalopod shells have, a sheen that shifts from bronze to green to the particular blue-black of deep water, depending on the angle of the light. Below the shell, trailing in the slow current, are its tentacles, not the 10 tentacles of a squid, not the 8 of an octopus, but many more than either, perhaps 50 or 60, each one tapering to a fine point, and carrying along its length the small sensory organs through which the animal reads the water it moves through. The ammonite drifts past you at a distance of perhaps 6 feet. It is hunting, not with urgency, not with the explosive speed that some predators employ, but with the calm patience of a creature that has learned to move through water so gradually that the things it intends to eat do not recognize it as a threat until the tentacles are already settling around them. It is descending into a school of the smaller shrimp-like crustaceans, that cluster in loose clouds just above the midpoint of the water column, and as it enters the cloud, the tentacles begin to move with a sudden, gentle decisiveness, gathering, closing, the animal's entire manner shifting from patient drift to something more focused without ever becoming hurried. You watch it eat. There is nothing violent about this. The shrimp are taken and held and consumed, one or two at a time, in a process that is measured and unhurried and completely natural in the way that all consumption in a healthy ecosystem is natural, not cruel, not merciful, simply necessary, simply part of the larger cycle by which matter moves through different forms of living tissue on its long journey between the sun and the seafloor and the rock and the sun again. When the ammonite has fed for a while, it ascends again, rising toward the lighter water above with a gentle pulsing of its mantle, adjusting its buoyancy with the fine control that the chambered shell allows, finding the depth it wants, the way a thought finds its level in a drowsing mind, without effort, without decision, simply arriving at the right place and resting there. There are hundreds of ammonites in this part of the sea, perhaps thousands. They are the most abundant large organisms in the water column, more numerous than the mosasaurs, more numerous than the plesiosaurs, more numerous than any of the animals that will one day seem to define this sea in the imagination of the fossil hunters who study it. The ammonite was the common creature, the ordinary creature, the creature so present in this sea that its absence will, one day, define the end of everything here. When the Cretaceous ends, when the asteroid arrives, or the volcanoes overwhelm, or the climate shifts beyond what even the most adaptable creatures can adjust to, the ammonites will go with it. Every species, every form, every variation that 300 million years of evolution produced. The nautilus, their closest surviving relative, will persist in the deep Pacific, but the ammonites, the great spiraling architecture builders of the Mesozoic seas, will be gone. Their final chapter will be written in the rock and read 80 million years later by people who will hold their fossils in careful hands and feel the weight of that loss in the calcium of something that was once alive. But that is not now. Now they are everywhere. They are as ordinary as sparrows. They are as common as the air. They are the texture of this sea, the background against which the more dramatic events of mosasaur hunting and plesiosaur fishing play out. Let them drift around you in their ordinary hundreds, each one complete, each one full of a life that requires no acknowledgement from you or anyone else to be fully lived. The current shifts slightly. You feel it as a change in the direction of the slow drift that has been carrying you eastward. Now, there is a subtle northward component added to the eastward flow, the result of some large-scale circulation pattern in the sea responding to the wind patterns high above the surface. The fish schools feel this too and adjust, their formation tilting slightly as the individuals orient themselves to the new direction of the current, maintaining their relative positions in the school with the same unconscious precision that characterizes all their movements. Closer to the surface, the water is warmer and the light is more insistent and the creatures are different again. Here are the largest ammonites, the ones that measure more than a meter across, whose shells carry the weight of years of calcium secretion in their heavy coils. Here too are creatures of a different sort, long-bodied fish with elongated jaws like the needlefish of your own time, their teeth designed for catching other fish in a movement that is more grab than bite. They move in the upper water with the speed that the warm surface layer supports, their bodies cutting through the water in a way that seems almost too efficient to be effortless, though effortless is exactly what it looks like. And sometimes, at the surface itself, breaking through from above, the shadow of a pterosaur, beating its wings against the air above the water, trailing its long beak through the surface, in the fishing technique that this group of flying creatures has been perfecting for millions of years. The beak skims the water and closes on a fish, and the animal lifts away, banking against the wind, returning to whatever rocky shore it came from. Its shadow crosses the sunlit surface and is gone, leaving only the ripple of its passage, rings, expanding outward and downward into the water below, in slow concentric pulses that arrive at your depth as the most delicate of vibrations, a whisper of the world above. You are aware, from down here, of how many worlds this sea contains. The surface world, where the pterosaurs fly and the sun is unmediated and the wind makes patterns on the water. The middle world where you drift, where the light is filtered and the currents are gentler and the life is dense and layered. The bottom world, where the sediment accumulates and the shells come to rest and the slow chemistry of transformation begins its patient work. 3 worlds stacked in the same volume of water, each one largely invisible to the others, each one complete in itself, each one sustained by and sustaining the others in a web of connections so intricate that the science of the future will spend centuries mapping it and still not reach its edges. You belong to none of these worlds. You are only passing through, a witness carried by the current, present in all of them briefly, belonging to none, needed by none, and therefore free to simply observe and drift, and let the warm water carry you from one layer to the next as gently as sleep carries a mind from one room of the night to another. The current here flows from the northwest to the southeast, slowly, measurably, carrying with it the particular warmth and mineral content of the water that entered this sea from the rivers of the western mountains many miles away. It has been travelling for weeks, this particular parcel of water, picking up and releasing heat, carrying organisms from one part of the sea to another, slowly mixing with the older water of the deeper basin. By the time it reaches you, it carries the history of its journey and its chemistry slightly fresher than the open sea, slightly warmer, slightly richer in the particular minerals that the mountain rocks contribute to the rivers that feed this inland basin. You can feel it against your skin, or you could, if you had skin here, if you were fully present in this place rather than drifting through it in the way that a thought drifts through a mind that is letting itself go quiet. The warmth is what remains when you release the need to feel it precisely. Just warmth, just the water, just the ambient living world settling around you as you settle into it. Something very large moves through the water far below you. You feel it before you see it, a change in pressure, a subtle pushing aside of water that your body registers as a shift, a nudge, a gentle reminder that the sea is not yours and never was, and that the things moving through it are older and larger and more certain of their place in it than you could ever be. You look down into the dimmer water below and you see, briefly, a shape. Immense, finned, moving at a depth where the light barely reaches, carrying itself through the water with the effortless power of something that has never encountered anything. It could not outswim or outlast. And then it is gone again, back into the dimness, back into the depth, leaving only the slow turning of the water in its wake. You exhale, or you would exhale, if breathing were required here. Instead, you simply release. The tension of watching, the brief quickening of attention that the large shape inspired, dissolves back into the ambient warmth of the water, back into the slow amber light, back into the drift that is not going anywhere in particular, and does not need to. The fish schools are still here, the ammonites are still here, the light is still amber, still warm, still falling through the water in the same patient way it has been falling all afternoon. Nothing has changed except the brief impression of something large moving below you, and that impression is already fading, already being replaced by the more ordinary and continuous impressions of the open water, the schools banking left. The ammonites drifting in small groups through the middle water, the distant suggestion of the surface above, the even more distant suggestion of the floor below. This is the water column. This is where most of the life in this sea lives, not at the surface, not at the bottom, but in the vast three-dimensional space between. It is the largest habitat on Earth in this time and in your own time alike, and it is full in the way that only the sea can be full, not packed, not crowded, but present in every part of itself, with the life appropriate to that part, organized by depth and temperature and light and current, into a series of overlapping communities that together constitute the complete ecology of an inland sea. If you are already drifting, already somewhere between waking and sleep, let yourself go the rest of the way. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. There is a creature in this sea that the future will find endlessly fascinating. It will be reconstructed from bones, studied in museums, rendered in illustrations and films in the imagination of children who press their faces against glass display cases and try to feel the depth of time between themselves and the thing behind the glass. In the future, it will have a name, mosasaur. But here, now, it has no name and no need of one. It has only its body, which is extraordinary, and its sea, which is warm and full of things to eat, and the 80 million years of evolutionary refinement that produced it. The mosasaurs came from the land. This is something the bones tell clearly. If you know how to read them, and the people of the future who dedicate their lives to reading such things will read this one with particular interest, because the mosasaurs did not simply drift into the water the way some land animals do, adopting a partly aquatic lifestyle while retaining feet and lungs, and a fundamental orientation toward the terrestrial world. The mosasaurs went all the way. Their legs became paddles. Their bodies became streamlined. Their tails developed vertical keels, not the side-to-side compression of a fish's tail, but a dorsal and ventral expansion that makes the tail a great propulsive fin, capable of driving the animal through the water with a power that fish of comparable size cannot match. The ancestor was something like a monitor lizard. Long, scaled, forked-tongued, capable in the water but not committed to it. That ancestor is long gone by the time you arrive in this sea. What evolved from it over the tens of millions of years that preceded this moment is something fundamentally different, something that would be unrecognizable to its own ancestor if the two could somehow be placed side by side. Evolution does not hurry, but it does not stop, and given time enough, it transforms. Given 70 or 80 million years and a warm, food-rich sea to adapt to, it transforms something that walked on land into something that rules the open ocean. The mosasaur you are watching now is not the largest kind. There are giants in this sea. There is a species called Tylosaurus that will eventually be found in the rocks of Kansas and South Dakota. Its skull alone longer than an adult human is tall, its total body length stretching past 12 meters, a creature that nothing in this sea can threaten except another creature of its own kind. That animal exists in this sea, somewhere to the north and east of where you drift now, lying in the shallower water near the eastern shores, digesting something large it caught days ago in a rush of speed and a closing of those enormous jaws. It is resting now. It rests for long periods between major feedings, the way crocodilians rest in your own time, not because it is lazy, but because an animal of that size requires a great deal of food, and the most efficient way to obtain it is in infrequent large meals rather than constant small ones. But the mosasaur near you now is a more moderate creature, something more like an apex predator of the middle range, an animal that everything smaller than itself avoids and everything larger than itself ignores. It is perhaps 5 meters long. It is moving through the water at what you would call a patrol pace. Not fast, not slow, simply covering ground. The way an animal covers ground, when it is neither hungry enough to hunt urgently, nor satisfied enough to rest. Its head moves slightly from side to side as it swims, the forked tongue flickering out into the water at intervals, sampling the chemical landscape for information that your nose could not begin to interpret, but that this creature reads with something like fluency. The mosasaur's scales are not the large, overlapping scales of a fish, not the tiny uniform scales of a snake. They are small and rounded and closely packed, and they cover the body in a texture that resembles, if you could touch it, the surface of a tennis ball, but flexible, warm, alive. The animal's coloration is something the fossil record cannot preserve, because color is carried in soft tissues that decay long before stone can remember them. But from what the scientists of the future will be able to infer by studying the structure of melanosomes, tiny cellular organelles that control pigmentation in exceptionally well-preserved specimens, the mosasaurs were likely countershaded, darker on the back, lighter on the belly. This is the coloration of almost every large ocean predator across the vast history of vertebrate life, because it works. From above, the dark back blends with the dark water below. From below, the pale belly blends with the lit surface above. The animal occupies the water column without announcing its presence to anything looking from either direction. You watch it from the side, which is the angle from which its camouflage does not apply, and from this angle it is simply beautiful. The body is a single long line of controlled power, every muscle visible in its movement under that smooth, scaled skin. The whole organism, expressing in every moment of its motion the millions of years that built it. It moves the way water moves inevitably, continuously, without hesitation or self-consciousness, committed to its own direction with a completeness that has no room in it for doubt. It has noticed something. The head stops its slow side-to-side motion and fixes on a direction, and the whole body responds to this information by subtly changing the pattern of its movement, the tail beats becoming slightly more frequent, the paddles bringing the nose around in the direction of attention. 40 meters ahead of it, a dense school of fish has gathered near a concentration of the larger plankton, a cloud of silver bodies rising and falling together in the upper water. The mosasaur reads this through its tongue, through its inner ear, through the lateral lines along its body, that sense the pressure waves the fish make as they move, a complete portrait of the school, assembled from multiple sensory channels simultaneously, painting a picture not in colour and shape, but in vibration and chemistry and water pressure. The approach begins. The mosasaur does not charge. It moves toward the school in the same unhurried cruise it has maintained, but the direction is now committed, the posture slightly lowered in the water, the paddles working in longer, slower strokes that produce a glide rather than a beat, a way of moving that generates less pressure wave, less signal for the lateral lines of the fish to detect, less warning of what is coming. This is not something the mosasaur learned. It is not something it was taught. It is simply what it does, because the ancestors that did it this way caught fish and the ones that charged directly caught fewer fish. And over generations that distinction, multiplied 1,000,000 times, added up to a particular way of being that the living animal carries in its body without knowing it, carries anything at all. The fish do not scatter until the mosasaur is very close. Then they scatter all at once, the school exploding outward in every direction like a silver explosion, each individual moving at maximum speed away from the center of the threat. And the mosasaur moves through the center of the explosion with open jaws, its conical teeth closing on several fish at once, swallowing without pausing, turning in the dispersing cloud to find the next concentration, moving from one group of fleeing fish to the next, with the focused efficiency of an animal, for whom this is simply what an afternoon is. You watch from a respectful distance. There is nothing that feels like danger in your observation of this feeding. The fish that are caught are not suffering in any way your mind can recognize as suffering. The speed of the mosasaur's strike and the sharpness of those conical teeth mean that the process is brief, and the fish that escape simply rejoin each other at the edges of the cloud and resume the slow drift that constitutes most of their lives. The sea accommodates this. It has always accommodated this. The predators take what they can, and the prey reproduces faster than the predators can consume them, and the balance is maintained not by any guiding principle, but simply by the arithmetic of reproduction and mortality working itself out in the warm water over millions of years. The mosasaur feeds for perhaps 10 minutes. Then, satisfied, it rises toward the surface in a long, angled ascent that brings its head out of the water into the air, and you can see from below the disruption it makes at the surface, the brief opening of the mouth, the intake of air that its lungs require, the closing again, the descent back into the water. This too was inherited from its land-dwelling ancestors, the lungs, the air-breathing, the periodic need to breach the surface of a world that will not give you oxygen through the water the way it gives it to the fish. The mosasaur is committed to the water in every physical sense but the respiratory one. It must surface to breathe. It does so with the casual practice of something that has been doing it its entire life, which is less than the total history of mosasaurs in this sea by perhaps 1,000 times, but which is still a long time by any measure that matters to the individual animal living it. After the breath, the animal descends again and continues its patrol. It will travel many kilometers today, covering the same broad territory it covers most days, following the patterns of prey distribution that its experience has taught it, not through conscious strategy, but through the accumulated association of certain water temperatures and certain currents and certain times of day with certain densities of food. The sea is its library and its home and its entire world, and it moves through it with the sureness of a mind moving through territory it knows in sleep. You follow at a comfortable distance for a while, drifting in the gentle pressure wake that the animal's passage creates, carried along in its slipstream the way a dream carries you along in a narrative that is not quite yours. The water around the mosasaur is subtly different from the water elsewhere, slightly warmer where its body heat has radiated outward, slightly disturbed where its passage has set, the water turning in slow vortices that trail behind each fin, stroke like the signature of a particular piece of music. And then the animal rounds a slow curve in its own direction and is gone, into the hazy middle distance of the sea, and you are alone again in the warm water with the light above you and the soft pale bottom below, and the schools of small fish glinting and turning in the space between. Alone, but not lonely. Loneliness requires the expectation of company that has not arrived. Here, in this sea, in this time, there is no such expectation. There is only the world as it is, present and complete, and you drifting through it, present and complete, each requiring nothing from the other, and therefore free to simply coexist in the ancient, wordless way that the sea and everything it contains have always coexisted. The light is the same amber it has been since you descended to this depth. The temperature has not changed. The currents continue their slow drift. You are still here. The sea is still here. Everything is very quiet, in the way that a world which has never heard a human voice is quiet, not silent, not empty, but free of a particular kind of noise that you carry with you everywhere in your waking life and only set down when sleep is deep enough. This is deep enough. There is another kind of creature in this sea, and it moves through the water in a way that is unlike anything you have seen before in any ocean of your own time. The mosasaurs move like snakes, undulating, their bodies flexing in the horizontal plane that their lizard ancestry inscribed into their movement. The plesiosaurs move like birds. Or rather, they move the way birds would move if birds had been redesigned for water. If someone had taken the engineering of flight and applied it to swimming, if the wing beat that carries a bird through air had been translated, stroke by stroke, into the movement that carries a body through the denser medium of the sea. You feel the plesiosaur before you see it. It announces itself through the water as a regular pulsing, not the lateral pressure wave of a swimming fish or mosasaur, but something more like a rhythmic compression, 4 beats close together and then a glide, and then 4 beats again, a pattern that the water carries to you as a kind of slow percussion. Then the animal resolves out of the middle water to your right, and you understand at once what was making that pattern. It is using 4 flippers, 2 in front and 2 behind, each one long and flat and paddle-shaped, each one beating in a downward and backward stroke that generates lift, as well as thrust the same basic physics as a penguin's wing, as a sea turtle's front flipper, as the pectoral fins of a manta ray. The 4 flippers work in a complex coordinated rhythm, and the body they power through the water is long and low-slung, the neck extending forward from the relatively small barrel of the torso, the head small and flattened at the end of a neck that is perhaps twice the length of a horse's neck. The tail is short and nearly irrelevant to locomotion, reduced by evolution to a steering rudder while the flippers assumed all the work of propulsion. This is a plesiosaur of the long-necked variety, what will later be classified as a polycotylid or elasmosaurid type, depending on the particular species. And there are many species of plesiosaur sharing this sea, ranging from the small and dolphin-like pliosaurs to the extraordinarily long-necked elasmosaurids that carry necks containing more vertebrae than any other animal in the history of vertebrate life. The one before you now has a neck of moderate length, perhaps 1.5 times the length of its body. Its total length from the tip of that long neck to the end of the stubby tail is perhaps 7 meters. It is not the largest plesiosaur in this sea. It is not the smallest. It is, in its own way, exactly the right size for what it does, in the same way that every well-adapted creature is exactly the right size for what it does. What it does, primarily, is catch fish. The long neck is a fishing device, a way to reach into a school of fish without the bulk of the body, arriving at the same time as the jaws and spooking everything in the vicinity. The plesiosaur approaches a school slowly, using its flippers to creep through the water with a minimum of disturbance, and then the neck extends, and the head drives into the school with a speed and precision that the neck's length and the head's small profile make possible. The teeth are long and thin, designed for snagging fish rather than crushing them, and the jaws close around a fish, and the head withdraws, and the fish is swallowed whole, and the process begins again. You watch it hunt from a comfortable distance. The animal is aware of you, its eyes. Set on the sides of that narrow head, give it a wide field of view, and you occupy some part of that field, but it has evaluated you and found you to be neither prey nor threat, and so it returns its attention to the more interesting question of where the fish are. You are categorized and dismissed, which is a kind of compliment from an animal that does not give compliments. The plesiosaur's flippers are extraordinary things to watch in motion. Unlike the mosasaur's paddles, which work mostly in the horizontal plane, these flippers generate their power in both the horizontal and vertical axes, producing a complex 3-dimensional force that allows the animal to maneuver in ways that a mosasaur, with its snake-like body, cannot easily match. It can turn in its own length. It can rise and fall vertically in the water column with a precision that seems almost impossible for something 7 meters long. It can hover in the water, 4 flippers beating in a slow, balanced rhythm that keeps the body perfectly still while the head explores the territory around it. This hovering is what it is doing now, a few meters away, as it investigates a dense concentration of the larger fish that has gathered in a shaft of sunlight descending through a gap in the cloud cover above the surface. The fish have gathered there, not because of the light itself. Fish are not heliotropic in that simple way, but because the slight warming the light creates has concentrated a cloud of plankton, and the fish are feeding on the plankton, and the plesiosaur is proposing to feed on the fish. It is a chain of small advantages, a cascade of cause and effect that runs from the cloud gap in the sky above down through the entire water column to the plankton and the fish, and the long-necked animal hovering beside you in the amber water. The neck extends. The head disappears into the cloud of fish. There is a brief disturbance, a flurry of silver shapes dispersing in all directions, and then the head withdraws with several fish in those long, thin teeth, and the animal swallows, and the neck extends again, and the cycle continues. It is patient beyond your ability to feel the patience. You can see the patience, can observe the measured quality of each movement, but feeling it requires a depth of stillness that your own nervous system is only beginning, here in this warm water in this ancient time, to approach. While the plesiosaur feeds, you have leisure to study the animal's skin. It is smooth, not scaled in the way of the mosasaur, but covered in something finer, the same kind of close, uniform integument that certain large marine reptiles of your own time carry, a skin that is soft-looking and well adapted to the water, carrying none of the rigidity of a terrestrial reptile's armour. The colour is, again, beyond what the fossil record will preserve, but the integument impressions found in certain exceptionally preserved specimens will suggest a skin that was relatively smooth and dark on the dorsal surface. And this animal presents itself to you as a dark form against the lighter water above, its outline clear and elegant, its movement precise. There is something about the way a plesiosaur moves that is deeply calming to observe. It has none of the urgency of the fish, none of the contained explosive power of the mosasaur. It moves with a kind of deliberate grace that speaks of an animal perfectly matched to its medium, an animal that has been moving through water for long enough both in evolutionary terms and in its own individual life, that movement is no longer something it does but simply something it is. You could watch it for a long time. You find that you do watch it for a long time, following it in your mind as it moves from one concentration of fish to another, the four flippers maintaining their slow, regular beat, the neck extending and withdrawing, the body drifting between one meal and the next. The plesiosaur lineage is ancient. Its ancestors were among the first vertebrates to return to the sea after the great vertebrate conquest of the land, making the journey back into the water beginning in the Triassic period, when the first terrestrial reptiles discovered that the sea was once again a productive and relatively uncrowded place to live after the extinction event that ended the Permian period had removed most of the marine life that had previously occupied it. These early plesiosaur ancestors were small amphibious things, still capable of moving on land, still spending time above the waterline, still carrying the architecture of terrestrial animals in their four-limbed bodies. But the sea was generous to them, and the generations that followed were less terrestrial and more aquatic, and then less aquatic and more fully marine, and by the time the Cretaceous arrived, the plesiosaurs were as committed to the water as the mosasaurs, never leaving it except to breathe at the surface. Did plesiosaurs come ashore to lay eggs? This question occupies the paleontologists of your own time, debated in careful academic papers with titles that would put most people to sleep without the assistance of a YouTube channel. The consensus is uncertain. Some researchers argue that plesiosaurs must have given live birth in the water, like their mosasaur contemporaries, because an animal of their body plan would have enormous difficulty hauling itself up a beach and moving across land to a nesting site. Others note that sea turtles, which have similarly awkward terrestrial bodies, manage this feat every nesting season. The truth may depend on the species, the season, the specific coastline. The truth may be lost forever, in the same way that most truths about soft tissue behavior and life history of extinct animals are lost dissolved into the rock with all the other things that stone does not know how to remember. Above you, much higher, almost at the surface, another plesiosaur passes larger, a different species, its neck shorter and its head proportionally bigger, its four flippers beating with more authority. This one is moving with a purpose that the smaller animal lacks, covering distance rather than hunting in a fixed territory, travelling on some agenda that its internal map has set for it. It passes over you like a slow cloud, its shadow very briefly dimming the light that falls on you, and then it is gone, and the light returns, and the smaller plesiosaur continues its patient feeding below. The afternoon continues. Time here is not divided into hours and minutes, those are human inventions, useful in a world where appointments must be kept, and meals must be prepared at specific moments, and the artificial structures of social life require coordination across distances. Time here is divided only into light and dark, warm and slightly less warm, fed and hungry. The sun moves across the sky above the surface in its daily arc, and the light that enters the water changes as it moves more direct and hotter at midday, lower and more angled in the morning and evening, and the creatures of the sea respond to these changes in ways that are so deeply inscribed in their biology that they have no more choice about them than a leaf has about turning. Toward the sun, the plesiosaur's feeding begins to slow as the afternoon progresses. The fish school that it has been working has thinned, the fish dispersing in response to the pressure of predation, and the animal must decide whether to follow the dispersing school or to move to find a new concentration. It circles the area once, the long neck swinging slowly from side to side as the head makes its assessment, and then the decision is made wordlessly, instantaneously, without deliberation, and the four flippers begin the stroke pattern that means travel rather than hover, and the animal moves away through the water to the northeast. You do not follow. You have been here long enough to feel the quality of this place, the particular texture of the water at this depth in this part of the sea, and you are comfortable here. The fish that dispersed when the plesiosaur was feeding have already begun to drift back, regathering slowly in the shaft of sunlight that has shifted slightly as the cloud cover above has rearranged itself. Small creatures that stirred when the large one passed have settled again. The water has returned to its ambient state, warm, amber-lit, gently moving, full of quiet life. A second plesiosaur drifts into your field of view from the south. This one smaller, younger seeming, in the quality of its movement, slightly less assured, slightly more reactive to the small disturbances of the water around it. It pauses near you, the four flippers beating in a slow hover, the neck swinging in an arc as the head investigates the water in every direction. It is young or younger, and it is still learning the territory, still mapping the patterns of prey distribution and current and temperature that the older animal navigated with the confidence of long experience. You are still here. The water is still warm. The light is the same light it has always been in this place, patient and amber, and carrying no judgment about what it illuminates. Let yourself be illuminated. Let yourself be carried. There is nowhere to go from here that would be better than here. The young plesiosaur, having completed its assessment of the area, begins to move again, the four flippers resuming their steady beat, carrying the long body and the long neck forward through the amber water toward whatever comes next. It moves away from you without looking back, already committed to the next thing, already present in the next moment, as all creatures are as you are too, now, here, in this warm water, in this ancient afternoon, in the last of the light that is still so beautiful it requires no commentary. Allow yourself to drift toward the west. The current moves in that direction anyway, a slow, persistent drift that carries water from the deeper central basin toward the shallower margins where the sea meets land, and you can simply let it carry you. There is nothing required of you here. The current knows where it is going even if you do not. The bottom is rising now. You can feel it in the quality of the light. It is getting brighter as the water gets shallower, the amber deeping back toward the warmer golds, and even a faint suggestion of green as the sunlight reaches the bottom and is reflected back up through the water column. The sediment below you is changing too, still soft, still carbonate-rich, but mixed now with finer material. The silt carried by rivers from the land, and dotted with the occasional larger grain of actual terrestrial sand, a visitor from the world above the water, the sea floor begins to acquire character. In the deeper water, the bottom was mostly flat, interrupted only by the occasional gentle undulation, the low mounds of sediment around burrows, the half-buried shells of dead ammonites. Here, where the light reaches fully, the bottom is more varied. Patches of what will eventually be called seagrass, though it is not the seagrass you know, but something older, something that was experimenting with the aquatic lifestyle, at a time when flowering plants were still a relatively new development on the land, grow in loose meadows across the pale sediment. The blades are narrow and long, moving in the current like the hair of someone drifting in a swimming pool, a continuous, gentle wave passing through the meadow from one end to the other. Among the grass blades, small creatures live their entire lives. Tiny crustaceans cling to the grass with the patience of creatures for whom a single grass blade constitutes an entire territory. Small fish hover at the edges of the meadow, darting in to pick off the crustaceans and then retreating to the open water where larger things cannot easily pursue them into the dense growth. A creature, something like a sea turtle, though not yet the sea turtle as your time knows it, but a cousin, a variation on the theme of a large reptile that has committed to the sea without entirely surrendering the ancestral arrangement of its body, moves slowly along the top of the meadow, grazing on the plants with a methodical patience that speaks of a creature with no urgency and no fear. The turtle's shell is perhaps a metre across, its flippers adapted to the same basic paddle function as the plesiosaurs, but less elegantly, less completely. The sea turtle retains more of the land ancestors' architecture than the plesiosaur does. The shell, a particularly strong reminder of the terrestrial body plan from which it evolved. It moves through the meadow with an unhurried thoroughness, biting off grass blades and chewing them with the slow, grinding motion of a large herbivore that has all the time in the world. Which, in a sense, it does. Sea turtles of your own time are descended from animals very like this one, and they are among the longest-lived vertebrates on Earth. Individuals living for more than a century are documented, though the documentation is itself relatively recent. This turtle here, in this sea, may live as long. It may live in water like this, in a sea, something like this one, for 80 or 100 years, through the slow changes of seasons and currents and prey distributions, through the periodic catastrophes of storms and disease, and the attentions of the very large mosasaurs, who find turtles to be both a challenge and a reward, through the entire long and uneventful arc of a life that will leave no trace in the future, except a few scattered bones and perhaps a single shell fragment in the chalk beds that this water is slowly laying down. You drift over the meadow. The grass blades brush against your imagined feet, the sensation one of tickling softness, and then you are past the meadow and into shallower water still, where the bottom is sandy and the light is bright and warm, and you can see very clearly in every direction. The western shore of this sea is not far now. You can sense it rather than see it, a change in the water's quality, a freshness contributed by the rivers that enter here, a reduction in the salt content that the organisms of the shallower margin have adapted to over generations of living in this brackish transitional zone. The shore itself emerges gradually. There is no abrupt edge, no cliff, no wall where the sea meets a fixed land. The water simply becomes shallower and shallower, the bottom rising toward the surface over the course of many hundreds of meters, so that by the time you are aware of being in truly shallow water, water that barely covers your knees in the imagining of it, you have already travelled through the transition zone without noticing the transition. The sea has become an estuary, and the estuary has become a mudflat, and the mudflat is dotted with plants that are not quite land plants and not quite water plants, but something between, something that has colonized this difficult middle zone, the way life colonizes every difficult middle zone, eventually, by simply adapting to it, by deciding that the difficulty is just the shape of home. Stand here for a moment, in the ankle-deep warm water of the western margin. The mud under your feet is soft and dark and smells of organic richness, the smell of decomposition and productivity, of things dying and other things being born from the dying, the fundamental smell of the places where the land and the water meet and exchange material and energy in the great slow commerce that keeps both of them alive. The water is cloudy here, tinted brown by the tannins from the forests above the tide line, carrying in suspension the fine sediment of the river that enters here and spreads out into the shallow sea in a plume of fresh water that gradually mixes with the salt. Look up now. Above the waterline, above the mudflats and the fringe of salt-tolerant plants, the land rises. And on the land here is where your eyes will need a moment to adjust, to accept what they are seeing, because this is not the land you know, and the plants on it are not the plants you know, and the light that falls through them is the same sunlight, but filtered through a canopy composed of species that your time has never seen, most of them extinct before your own species took its first step. The closest trees are cycads. They look, at first glance, something like palm trees, a stocky trunk, not very tall, topped by a crown of long, stiff, pinnate fronds that spread outward in a rough sphere, the fronds dark green and glossy, catching the afternoon sun and holding it. But these are not palms. Palms are flowering plants and are still relatively new in the world by the time of this sea. Cycads are something much older, seed-bearing plants that were already ancient when the dinosaurs were young, survivors of earlier mass extinctions, slow-growing and long-lived and adapted to the warm, moist climate of the western shore with a completeness that requires no improvement. Among the cycads, other plants grow in the spaces between. There are tree ferns, enormous ferns the height of small trees, their fronds unfurling in the moist air with the slow urgency of things that have been growing since before the idea of urgency was invented. There are horsetails along the wetter margins. Close to the water, their jointed stems and hauled leaves unchanged in basic design from the horsetails that grew in the coal forests of the Carboniferous period, more than 200 million years before this moment. And here and there, mixed among the older plants, there are the flowering trees newcomers, evolutionarily speaking, but establishing themselves with the vigor of things that have discovered an advantage and are in the process of exploiting it. The flowering trees are changing the land. They are changing it slowly, as geological change always happens slowly, but they are changing it. They carry a reproductive advantage that the older plants lack. The flower, with its elaborate arrangements for attracting pollinators, for ensuring that pollen travels from one individual to another in a targeted and efficient way rather than drifting on the wind and mostly being wasted. The insects that pollinate them, the beetles and early moths and primitive flies, co-evolve with the plants, their bodies and behaviors shaped over generations by the flowers, and the flowers shaped in turn by the insects. It is a mutual transformation, a collaboration written in the language of natural selection, each party changing the other over millions of years in a conversation that will produce, eventually, most of the flowering diversity that your own world takes for granted. Something moves in the forest. You hear it before you see it a sound, though sound is perhaps too precise a word for what you experience. A vibration in the air that your body registers as a rhythm, a pattern, a footfall, and then through the cycad fronds you see the shape that made it. A dinosaur moving along the forest edge, pausing to reach up into the canopy with a neck that needs no effort to reach what most other animals in this world cannot. It is a hadrosaur, one of the duck-billed dinosaurs that are among the most successful large herbivores of this period, present across the entire western shore of this sea and the forests that back it. This one is perhaps 8 meters long, from the flattened bill to the stiff counterbalancing tail, its body covered in a skin whose color you can actually guess at with some confidence, for hadrosaur mummies have been found in the rocks of the future, preserved with their skin intact, and the skin is patterned in ways that suggest countershading similar to the mosasaur, and perhaps the suggestion of other patterns that your imagination can paint in as you stand at the edge of the water and watch it browse. The hadrosaur does not see you. It is facing away, its attention on the canopy above, its jaws working in the grinding, battery-milled way that hadrosaur jaws work, not the simple bite and swallow of the carnivores, but a complex milling action in which the upper and lower dental batteries slide against each other like grinding stones, reducing the tough plant material to a paste that can be efficiently digested. The sound of this chewing carries across the mudflat to where you stand. A soft, continuous grinding, rhythmic and unhurried. The sound of 10,000 tons of plant material being processed into hadrosaur across the western shore of this sea every year. The afternoon light falls through the cycad fronds and dapples the hadrosaur's back in shifting patterns of brightness and shadow. The animal moves a few steps along the forest edge, selecting a new branch, applying those grinding jaws to it with the same patient thoroughness. A smaller hadrosaur, a juvenile, perhaps a quarter of the adult's size, follows behind at a few meters, mimicking the adult's browsing with the inexpert enthusiasm of a young animal still learning what to eat and how to reach it. You stand in the ankle-deep water and watch them for a while. They do not notice you. They are entirely absorbed in the task of consuming enough forest to sustain themselves through the afternoon, and in this task they are completely, peacefully focused. There is something deeply restful about watching a large animal eat. It is the most fundamental expression of a creature at peace with its own existence. An animal doing exactly what it is built to do, in exactly the place it is built to do it, with nothing in the moment that requires any response other than the eating itself. The light is beginning to angle lower in the sky above the forest. The shadows lengthen across the mudflat. The water around your ankles is still warm, but the air above the waterline has taken on the slight cooling that comes in the hour before evening, when the sun's angle decreases and the shadow of the forest edge begins to cross the mudflat like a slow tide coming in from above. You turn back toward the sea. The water is still there, warm and amber and endlessly patient. You wade back into it, and it rises around your legs and your waist and eventually your shoulders, and you let yourself float again, and the land recedes behind you as the current, still the same current, still moving gently eastward, now that you have crossed the shallow margin and are heading back into the deeper water, carries you back into the world you came from. The hadrosaur's chewing sound follows you for a little while, fainter and fainter, until the water closes over you entirely and all you can hear is the low pulse of the sea itself. The current, the slow shift of water against the bottom, the distant and barely perceptible vibration of everything alive in this enormous, ancient, utterly undisturbed world. Let that sound carry you. Let it carry you as far as it wants to go. The light is leaving now. Not suddenly, nothing in this world moves suddenly except the predators. And the light is not a predator, only a visitor that comes and goes on a schedule older than anything with a name. The amber above you is deepening, the gold extracting itself from the water column as the angle of the sun above the surface decreases and the proportion of its light that penetrates into the water diminishes. The world is not going dark, it is going deeper. It is settling into a richer, more saturated version of itself. You have nothing to fear from the dark of this sea. You carry this understanding without knowing how it arrived, a certainty that settles around you the way the water settles around everything it holds, without explanation and without argument. The creatures of this sea have their own arrangements with the darkness, their own ways of operating in the absence of the light that organizes the day, and those arrangements have nothing to do with you. You are still the transparent presence, the nameless drifter, the witness that leaves no trace. The dark changes nothing about your position here. The surface above, visible in these last minutes of the transition, catches the last of the western light in a way that has no equivalent in your ordinary experience of sunsets. From below, a sunset is a gradual extinction of the shimmer, the slow withdrawal of the fractured light that was, during the afternoon, so abundant, replaced by a surface that goes from silver to pewter to a deep blue-grey as the sky above it cycles through its colours. The colours of that sky, the oranges and reds and the deep blue that comes in behind the colour as the sun gets fully below the horizon, do not penetrate the water in any form you can see from here. What you get is only the subtraction, the light leaving, the world above going private. But in the final minutes of the transition, there is something remarkable that happens in the water around you. The surface, still catching the last edge of the sun, seems to radiate rather than transmit. It glows from within the way a paper lantern glows, the light distributed evenly across it rather than coming through in focused shafts, and this distributed glow falls through the water in a way that has a particular quality, a warmth that is different from the directional warmth of the afternoon sun. It is the light of a world saying good night. It is the light that is left after the insistence has gone out of the day. You float in it. You let it fall over you and through you and past you. There is nothing you need to do about it. It is simply happening, as it has been happening every evening for as long as this sea has existed, and as it will continue to happen every evening for the remaining millions of years this sea has left. You are a very small part of a very large and very regular thing, and that smallness, that regularity, is exactly the right place to be. With the diminishing light, the pattern of life in the sea changes. This is something you can feel rather than see in the first moments of the shift, a change in the quality of the water's movement, a different kind of presence in the space around you. The creatures that rely on sight for hunting the large mosasaurs, the piscivorous plesiosaurs with their long necks and their darting heads, begin to ascend toward the surface where the last light lingers, making use of the transitional hours before full dark to make one final pass through the schools of fish that are also responding to the shift in light, by beginning their own migrations, many of them moving toward the surface as the deep water darkens, drawn up by the same biological clocks that governed their ancestors' behavior in this water for millions of years before them. But others descend. Things that were relatively inactive during the bright hours of the afternoon become more active now, drawn out by the darkness, the way cave creatures are drawn out by the absence of what disturbs them. There are fish here that have large eyes, very large eyes, disproportionately large for their body size, eyes designed to gather the maximum amount of the minimal light available at depth during the night hours. They have been resting in the dim water near the bottom all afternoon, and now they rise, slowly, into the mid-water zone where a different kind of opportunity presents itself: the vertical migration. This is what the scientists of the future will call the phenomenon you are witnessing: the daily movement of billions of organisms through the water column, ascending at night and descending by day, driven by a combination of biological clock and light response that has been refined by evolution into one of the most reliable behaviors in the ocean. The belemnites and the larger crustaceans and the mesopelagic fish, the ones with the large eyes and the faint bioluminescent organs along their undersides, all participate in this migration, rising at dusk into the richer upper waters where the phytoplankton are most abundant, feeding through the night hours, and then descending again before dawn to the dim water where the surface predators cannot easily find them. The most spectacular change in the darkening water is something you might not immediately recognize as biological. It begins as a faint suggestion at the edges of your vision, a point of cold blue-green light, then another, then several, then more. The bioluminescence of this sea is beginning to announce itself in the way that bioluminescence always announces itself in dark water. Gradually, like stars appearing in a sky as the daylight drains away, each one faint at first, and then more definite as the background light decreases and the threshold of visibility drops. The organisms producing this light are many and varied. Some are the same microscopic planktonic organisms that inhabit the sunlit surface during the day, carrying in their small bodies the chemical machinery for converting chemical energy into lighter cold, blue-green, magical light that has no heat and makes no sound, and serves purposes that are still being debated by the biologists of your own time, with theories ranging from defense to communication to simple metabolic byproduct. Whatever its purpose, its effect on you, watching from the dark water of an 80-million-year-old sea, is the same effect that bioluminescence has always had on any mind that encounters it, a kind of wonder that softens the distinction between what is real and what is dreamed. You have seen bioluminescence before, perhaps, in the dinoflagellates that make breaking waves glow blue on warm summer nights, or in the fireflies of a meadow at dusk, or in photographs of deep-sea creatures taken by submersibles at depths where no light from the surface penetrates. But you have not seen it like this at this density, in this warmth, surrounded by water that is itself alive on a scale you have no real way to comprehend. The lights begin to pulse and drift, and occasionally to flash in brief, brilliant points, and the cumulative effect is of a sky full of stars turned upside down and submerged, of a galaxy made liquid and warm and close enough to touch. Something larger moves through the bioluminescent cloud. It is a fish of moderate size, perhaps 1/2 meter long, and its passage through the cloud of glowing organisms creates a wake of disturbed light, a trail of stirred-up luminescence that marks its path through the water, the way a boat's wake marks its path through dark water on a moonless night. The fish does not know it is illuminated. It is simply moving, hunting, doing the things it always does in the dark hours. But its path is visible now, written in cold light on the dark water, a script in a language that no one here can read because no one here has invented the concept of language or of reading, or of the metaphor that connects a moving fish to a written word. More trails appear. The night sea is full of hunters and full of hunted, full of the continuous quiet drama of predation and survival that never stops, day or night, winter or summer, in any ocean, in any period of the world's history. But the darkness softens this drama in the way that distance softens any drama. The violence, if it is violence, happens at the ends of those trails of light, somewhere you cannot quite see, and what you observe is only the path, the luminous track, the beautiful cold calligraphy of a moving fish in dark water. You watch the trails for a while, the long, slow curves and sudden angles of hunting fish and drifting plankton, and the occasional larger body that moves through the water column with a slowness that seems contemplative. The bioluminescence does not illuminate the sea the way a light source illuminates a room. It is too diffuse, too scattered, too brief in its individual expressions for that. What it does is create a kind of awareness, a sense of the density of life around you, a visual confirmation of what you could already feel through the water's subtle movements, that you are not alone here, that the dark water is not empty, that the absence of visible form does not mean the absence of presence. The temperature of the water has not changed. The sea here does not cool significantly at night. The water's thermal mass is too great. The depth is too shallow for the extreme temperature variations that the deep ocean experiences. The surface may cool slightly in the hours after midnight, but here, at your depth, in this warm season, in this warm time, the water holds its heat with the same indifference to the passing of day and night that defines all things that move slowly enough to ignore the urgency of the present moment. Hours pass. The concept is loose here. Hours are a human invention, a division of the continuous into countable units, a way of giving the uninterrupted flow of time a structure it does not naturally possess. What passes here is not hours, but the gentle rhythm of the night itself, the slight cooling of the surface far above, the continuing migration of organisms through the water column, the slow drift of the current carrying you in one direction or another, without requiring any decision from you about where to go. You are very still in the water now, or rather, you are moving only as the current moves, drifting at the current's pace, which is slow enough that stillness and motion are barely distinguishable. Your body, the imagined body you carry into this place, has reached the temperature of the water around it, or close enough that the boundary between your skin and the sea has become something philosophical rather than physical. You are warm throughout. You are surrounded by warmth. You are, in some sense, that is beyond metaphor, part of the warmth, part of the slow thermal system of the sea, part of the 80-million-year-old project of this water, keeping itself at a particular temperature and carrying within itself a particular kind of life. The bioluminescent lights drift past you, some close enough that if you extended a hand you could disturb the water around them and watch them flash in response to that disturbance. You do not extend a hand. There is no need. The lights are fine where they are. You are fine where you are. The night sea is doing what it has always done, will always do, long before and long after any human mind was present to witness it and find it beautiful. The darkness deepens. Not the darkness of fear, not the darkness of a room with something in it that you cannot see, the darkness of completion. The darkness of a thing that has finished what it needed to do during the light hours and is now resting, reorganizing, preparing for the return of light without urgency, without worry, with only the patient biological certainty that the light will return, because the light always returns, because it has always returned, because the planet that carries this sea is still turning on its axis, and the sun that warms it is still burning, and will burn for billions of years more. A large shape passes high above you, barely visible in the bioluminescent ambient light as a darker mass against the slightly lighter dark of the upper water. It is a mosasaur, patrolling the middle of the water column in the night hours as it does every night, covering ground, keeping the territory, existing in the dark sea with the same competence it shows in the light. It does not know you are here. It will not know you are here when it has passed. You leave nothing behind in this water, no impression, no chemical trace, no disturbance that persists longer than the few seconds required for the water to rebalance itself. Let the dark hold you. Let the lights drift past you. Let the warm water keep you at the temperature of sleep. You are exactly where you should be. The night is deep and old and warm, and somewhere in the middle of it, in the dark water between a sky you cannot see and a floor you cannot reach, you are simply present, in the way that all things are present that have stopped trying to be anywhere else. In the night sea, with the bioluminescent drift of tiny lights moving past you, and the warm dark water holding you in its familiar embrace, let your mind descend below the surface of the immediate world. Not physically, there is no need to move deeper into the water, no reason to approach the bottom more closely than you have already been. But conceptually, in the way that a mind that is close to sleep can move through ideas the way a body moves through water without friction, without the resistance that waking thought usually provides, let yourself sink into the deeper question that this place has been quietly asking since you arrived in it. What is under you? Not just the sediment on the bottom of this sea, not just the pale carbonate ooze and the buried shells and the bivalves opening and closing in the dark water over the pale floor. What is under all of that? What does this sea rest on? The sea rests on a continental plate, a thick slab of ancient rock, largely composed of granite and metamorphic material that crystallized out of magma billions of years ago, in a time so remote from even this ancient moment that the 80 million years you are currently inhabiting feels recent by comparison. The Canadian Shield, though it does not yet have that name, though Canada does not yet exist and shields as a geological term are still 80 million years away from being coined, sits to the north and east, stable, massive, eroded down over billions of years from what were once the roots of mountain ranges as tall as the Himalayas, into the flat ancient low country that drains toward this sea. To the west, under the shallow water and the mudflats and the forests you visited at the western shore, the land is actively building itself. The Laramide orogeny, the mountain-building event that will eventually produce the Rocky Mountains, has not quite begun yet. But the subduction that will drive it is already underway, the Pacific Plate pushing under the western edge of the continent and generating the volcanic activity and crustal compression that, over the next tens of millions of years, will push the land upward into ranges that the rivers then spend the following tens of millions of years pulling back down again, carrying the mountain material to the sea in the form of the very sediment that now colours the western margin of this water a soft brown. So this sea exists in a bowl bounded on the west by the growing highlands and on the east by the old flat shield, and filled with warm ocean water that flooded in from north and south as the sea level rose during the long, warm greenhouse period of the Cretaceous. The bowl is tilted very slightly to the east. The western mountains push the land up on that side, creating a gradual slope from west to east that will persist, in various forms, for tens of millions of years after this sea has drained away. It will drain away. This is something worth holding in your mind as you drift in the dark water of its living present. This sea is temporary. Not on the scale of your own life. On that scale, it is essentially permanent, so long-lived that it would take more human generations than you can meaningfully count to span its existence. But on the geological scale, on the scale of the deep time that built the rock you are resting above, this sea is a brief event. It will last perhaps 30 or 40 million years in total. Then the sea level will fall, and the climate will shift, and the bowl will drain, and the water will be gone, and the floor of this sea will be exposed to the air for the first time, and the organisms that lived in it will begin the slow process of becoming the fossils that geologists will study in the Cretaceous rocks of Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado. Those fossils, let yourself think about them for a moment, not with urgency, but with the gentle attention of a mind that is allowed to wander. The ammonites you have seen here will be found in those rocks. Some of them extraordinarily well preserved, the chambers of their shells still intact, the surface details of the ribbing still visible in the mineral replica that stone makes of the original calcium. The mosasaur bones will be scattered through the chalk beds, enormous skulls and vertebrae and the long flattened paddle bones that were once feet, each one carrying in its architecture the complete story of the evolutionary transformation from land to sea. The plesiosaur bones will be there too, the long neck vertebrae like a string of stony beads, the paddle bones flattened and broad, the small skull sometimes still attached to the neck and sometimes not, the whole animal disarticulated by the slow movement of the sea floor before burial, and the chalk itself. The chalk that the coccolithophores are making right now, this minute, in the sunlit surface water far above you. In 40 million years that chalk will be rock. In 80 million years, which is to say, in your own time it will be the light-coloured sedimentary strata visible in road cuts across the Great Plains, in the cliffs above river valleys, in the cores pulled up by drilling rigs searching for the petroleum that the compressed organic matter of ancient seabeds produces over geological time. Someone drilling for oil in Kansas is drilling through the floor of this sea. Someone building a highway through a South Dakota badland is cutting through the walls of the world you are currently inhabiting. This is what deep time does to you, if you let it. It makes the present feel both more real and more transparent more real, because it is the immediate, living expression of a process that has been running for billions of years, transparent because you can see through it to all the time that preceded it and all the time that will follow it. The ammonite drifting past you in the dark water is real. The Kansas limestone that will one day preserve its trace is also real. Both are true simultaneously. The time between them is the measure of how long the planet has been doing what the planet does, without anyone's permission or assistance. There is something profoundly restful about this perspective, if you can hold it without letting the vertigo of scale overwhelm the quietness of it. The vertigo comes from trying to feel the full extent of the time, to make it emotionally present the way a short stretch of remembered time is emotionally present. But that is not the right way to hold it. The right way to hold it is loosely, the way you hold a large smooth stone in open hands, not gripping, not containing, just present, supporting without claiming. The sea below you has been accumulating its floor since long before you arrived. Every day, every hour, the microscopic shells of the coccolithophores fall through the water column and settle on the sediment. Every season, the larger ammonites and mollusks and crustaceans die and are carried to the bottom by gravity, and the soft parts decompose, and the mineral parts become part of the record. The record is being written now, in this darkness, in the water that holds you. It is being written in the language of calcium and silica and organic compounds compressed under their own weight, a language that will not be deciphered for 80 million years, but that contains already all the information that any careful reader will ever need. The rock remembers. This is the fundamental thing about the solid earth: it remembers, imperfectly and incompletely and in a language that requires a great deal of translation, but it remembers. The rocks of the future will remember this sea. They will remember the ammonites and the mosasaurs and the shallow warm water and the gentle rain of carbonate from above. They will remember the western mountains and the eastern lowlands and the slow tilting of the basin. They will remember, in their mineralogy and their chemistry and the microscopic structures of their grains, the temperature of this water and the chemistry of this atmosphere and the angle of the sun above this sea on this particular evening. You are inside a memory that has not yet been formed. You are the thing being remembered before the remembering has happened. The water around you is in the process of becoming history, is in the first moments of its long journey, from present to past, to fossil record, to geological formation, to the piece of pale rock that someone will hold in their hands one day and wonder about. You are the wonder, already here, already complete, already exactly as it will one day seem from the far side of all that time. The carbon in your own body, the carbon in every cell of the body you have left behind in the waking world, was once inside a star. Before it was a star, it was a cloud of hydrogen and helium. Before it was a cloud, it was something else, going back and back through the layers of cosmic time to the first seconds after the universe began. The carbon moved through the star, and then through the explosion that ended the star, and then through the nebula that the explosion created, and then through the gradual condensation of that nebula into a new solar system, and then through the early Earth's geology, and then through the first oceans, and then through the first living organisms, and then through every living organism in the long chain of life, from those first organisms to the ones in this sea, to the ones that will evolve after this sea is gone, to the eventual mammals that will eventually give rise to you. Every atom of carbon in your body has been on this entire journey. Every atom has been part of a star, and part of a nebula, and part of a primordial ocean, and part of organisms that lived and died in seas like this one, in seas older and younger than this one, in the warm, shallow water of a planet that was young and is old, and will be something else again before it is finished. In that sense, in the atomic sense, in the elemental sense that precedes all biology and all geology and even all chemistry, you belong here not as a visitor from the future, but as a local. The atoms are local. They have always been local. They were here before there was a here to be in, and they will be here after here is something else entirely. The night is deep now. The bioluminescence still drifts in small constellations through the dark water. The temperature has not changed. The current is slower than it was this afternoon, the tide drawing back slightly from the western shore and pushing the water gently eastward in a pattern that has been running since the moon first settled into its orbit around the planet and began its slow gravitational conversation with the sea. The moon is larger in this sky than it is in yours. Not dramatically so. It has been moving away from the Earth very slowly since it formed, slowed by tidal friction, and in 80 million years it will be perceptibly closer and slightly larger in the sky. It rises now behind the eastern lowlands, a disk that is perhaps 10% larger in apparent diameter than the moon, you know, its light falling on this sea in the cold grey of reflected sunlight. From below the surface, the moon is not visible. You would need to be at or near the surface to see it. But its light, reduced and scattered as it enters the water, adds to the faint ambient illumination of the night sea, a source of light so dim it can barely compete with the bioluminescence, but is nonetheless present, a reminder that the sky exists even when the sky is invisible from here. Let your mind rest on the rock below you, not on the sediment, which is soft and recent rest on the ancient bedrock far beneath the sediment, the billions of years old granite that is the foundation of all of this. It is down there, unmoving, patient beyond the capacity of living things to be patient, holding up the sea and the sediment and the water and all the living things in the water with the same implacable geological steadiness that it will maintain for billions of years more. It is the deepest possible resting place. It has never needed to move quickly. It has never needed to hurry. Rest on it. Let it hold you. Let the rock remember you too, as something that passed through this water on a night 80 million years ago and left no trace at all except the gentlest disturbance of the water, already dissipated, already gone, already perfectly and completely at peace. The night holds everything with the same indifference that the rock holds everything without preference, without the need for any of it to be other than it is. You are part of everything the night holds. The bioluminescent plankton and the drifting belemnites, and the mosasaur patrolling the upper water and the sediment accumulating on the floor, and you, drifting in the warm, dark middle, all held equally, all held gently, all held for exactly as long as each of you needs to be held before the world moves on to its next arrangement. You are warm, you are held. The rock is below you, patient and ancient, and the night is above you, patient and dark, and between them you float in the living middle of the world, dissolving slowly into sleep. If you are drifting now, let yourself drift all the way. There are more stories here whenever you are ready. Subscribe, and the next one will be waiting when you return to the surface. Sleep well. Something is changing. The change is slow, almost imperceptible at first. A gradual lightening in the water above you, a shift in the quality of the dark from absolute to merely deep. The bottom of the night has passed, and the sky above the surface is beginning its long preparatory brightening, moving through the spectrum from black to deep blue to the particular shade of blue-grey that precedes colour itself in the hierarchy of a dawn sky. You rise toward it, not urgently, there is never any urgency here, but with the slow inevitability of a bubble ascending through water, or a thought ascending through the layers of a dissolving sleep. The water around you lightens as you rise. The bioluminescent creatures of the night hours are still present, but diminishing in visibility as the ambient light increases and their cold light becomes less remarkable against the growing brightness of the world above. They will not stop producing light. The chemistry continues regardless of whether anyone can see it, but the darkness that made them visible is retreating, and they retreat with it into the invisible world of things present but imperceivable. The surface is above you now, very close, close enough that you can see the sky beyond it, though the sky and the sea are still, at this hour, nearly the same shade of dark blue-grey, and the boundary between them is a suggestion more than a line. The surface is calm this morning, or nearly calm. A low swell rolls through it from the northwest, the remnant of a wind that was blowing somewhere out to sea last night, its energy travelling across the water long after the wind itself has died. Each swell lifts the surface and releases it in a rhythmic undulation that is slow and regular and deeply, fundamentally calming to observe from below. You drift at the surface now, in the top metre of water, where the boundary between the sea and the sky exists. From here the world is two worlds simultaneously, and you're at the junction between them, able to look up into the air and down into the water in the same moment, present in both without fully belonging to either. Above the surface, the sky is lightening. The stars which have been present all night above this sea, the same stars that your time will know but arranged slightly differently, the slow movement of the stars relative to each other being one of the most gradual processes in the observable universe, are fading as the sky behind them brightens. The eastern horizon, which here is the low flat horizon of the inland sea stretching to the east, is beginning to show the first colour of the coming day, a warmth below the blue, a staining of the grey with something that could almost be called orange, if the eye that sees it is willing to be generous. The sea around you at the surface is different from the sea you spent the night in. It is cooler here, not dramatically cooler, not uncomfortable, but perceptibly different, the surface having lost heat to the air during the long hours of the night, in a slow exchange that the deeper water did not participate in. It is also more active. The surface is where the weather happens. where the wind touches the water, where the exchange of gases between sea and atmosphere takes place. There is a reason that life in the sea is concentrated in the upper sunlit layers, not just because of the light, but because of the oxygen the atmosphere provides through constant diffusion at the surface, the carbon dioxide the sea absorbs and uses and releases in the great biogeochemical cycles that regulate the planet's chemistry. A mosasaur surfaces beside you. It has been at depth all night. The large predators can hold their breath for extended periods, as their descendants, the sea snakes and marine iguanas and sea turtles, can in your own time, and it rises now to breathe with the practiced efficiency of an animal that has been breathing air at the surface of a sea for its entire life. The head clears the surface, the nostrils at the top of the skull open, the air rushes in and is held for a moment, and then the animal descends again, leaving only the circular ripple of its passage, which expands outward across the early morning surface and eventually dissipates into the low swell. More mosasaurs surface around you, at intervals, in different directions. They have spread out through the sea during the night, following the movements of the prey that the dark hours redistribute, and now as the light returns they are converging again on the productive waters of the Western Central Basin, where the morning will offer the best hunting conditions. You can hear them, or would be able to hear them, if hearing were available to you in the way it is available in the waking world, as a sequence of small surface disturbances, each one its own brief interruption of the water's glassy morning surface. The sky is fully colourful now. The orange along the eastern horizon has spread upward and outward, washing through pink and then a clear pale yellow as the sun approaches the horizon line. The clouds above, and there are clouds, as there are almost always clouds over a warm inland sea, the water evaporating constantly in the heat and rising to form the convective towers that produce the afternoon thunderstorms. This region is prone to, during the wet season, the clouds catch the early light and hold it in their undersides, glowing gold and amber, and eventually a deep pink, as the geometry of sun and cloud and atmosphere works itself out in the usual way of dawns. The first direct light of the morning sun strikes the surface at a low angle, and from below the surface this light is extraordinary. It enters the water at the angle of a sunbeam entering a room at dawn, concentrated and golden, and full of the particular warmth of low-angle light. It illuminates the upper water in long shafts that penetrate for several meters before dispersing into the general ambient brightness, and in those shafts, the particles in the water, the plankton, the fine suspended sediment, the microscopic organic matter become visible as a glowing drift, each particle catching the light and holding it for a moment before the current carries it out of the shaft and into the ordinary brightness of the rest of the water. This is the most beautiful light in the world. This is what you think, or would think, if thinking were the mode you are operating in, which it is not quite. You are in the mode that is between thinking and feeling, between waking and sleep, between the world you came from and the world you are in. In this mode, the light is simply beautiful, and the beauty requires no commentary, no analysis, no placement in a context. It simply is, and you are simply in it, and that is enough. The sea comes back to life around you with the returning light. The fish that retreated to the bottom during the night hours, or that schooled tightly in the dark for mutual protection, begin to disperse again, spreading outward into the brighter water of the morning with the confidence of creatures whose safety is better assured in visibility than in darkness. The larger plankton, the copepods and amphipods that spent the night near the surface, feeding on the phytoplankton in the relative safety of darkness, begin their daily descent back toward the dimmer water below the sunlit zone, a vertical migration of billions of tiny animals moving downward through the water column in the first hours of morning, as reliably as the tide. The pterosaurs are back. In the pre-dawn darkness you could not see them, but now, with the sky brightening and the sea calm and the wind from the west carrying the smell of the open water toward the land, they are launching from the rocky headlands to the northwest and catching the morning thermal updrafts, gaining altitude in long spiralling ascents, before levelling off into the gliding flight that costs very little energy. From below the surface, they appear as angular shadows against the brightening sky, their wings spread in the rigid triangular shape of their particular anatomy, their long skull with its elaborate crest, casting an even longer shadow on the water as they pass low overhead. One of the smaller pterosaurs descends toward the surface, its beak extended, skimming the water in the hunting technique you observed yesterday. This morning, the sea surface is calmer, and the fish are more concentrated in the surface layer, and the hunting is productive. The beak closes on a fish with a sound that is barely audible, a soft liquid snap, and the animal lifts away with the fish held crosswise in those long jaws, banking left and climbing back toward altitude, the fish still struggling briefly before going still. The morning deepens. The sun clears the eastern horizon, and its light strengthens from the warm gold of the horizon to the brighter, more neutral light of full morning, and the sea responds by brightening from amber back toward the cleaner blues and greens of the shallow water in full daylight. The water temperature begins to rise almost imperceptibly as the surface absorbs the sun's energy, and the first hints of thermal stratification establish themselves, the surface layer warming slightly, becoming slightly lighter than the water below, settling into the uppermost position by density as the day begins its slow warming work. You are still here. You have been here through the night, and through the dawn and into the morning, and the sea has not asked you to leave, and the water has not changed the way it holds you, and the light has only gotten more beautiful, which is the direction that light moves in the morning hours before it gets too hot and too direct to be beautiful in quite this way. The world is fully awake around you now. The creatures of the day have resumed their daily patterns, and the creatures of the night have settled into the quieter resting mode that the light imposes on them, and the sea is running on the same timetable it runs on every day, the same timetable it has run on for tens of millions of years, and will run on for tens of millions more, indifferent to the uniqueness of any individual morning the way that only a very old and very large thing can afford to be. You are drifting. The morning light is on the water. Everything is as it should be. The current is carrying you eastward now, away from the western shores with their shallow meadows and their hadrosaur forests, back toward the deeper central basin of the sea. You have been in the shallows and at the surface and through the night and into the morning, and now the drift of the water is taking you toward the place where this sea is deepest, where the bottom falls away to several hundred meters, where the light from above is the faintest suggestion of a distant brightness, rather than the clear amber of the shallows. The transition from shallow to deep is gradual but perceptible. The bottom drops away below you in a slow slope, the pale sediment of the shelf giving way to the slightly different character of the deeper basin floor, darker in colour, finer in grain, less disturbed by the currents that move the upper water, accumulating more slowly because the rate of supply of organic material from the surface decreases with distance from the productive coastal zones. The fish schools are sparser out here. The foraging mosasaurs and plesiosaurs still pass through, but with less frequency, covering larger territories in search of the prey that is distributed more thinly across the open water. But sparse does not mean empty. Nothing in this sea is truly empty. The deep central basin has its own inhabitants, its own rhythms, its own version of the density of life that characterizes every zone of this sea. Here in the deeper water, the plankton production of the sunlit surface far above settles slowly downward in a continuous gentle snow, the same kind of organic fallout that built the sediment of the shallower zones, but falling farther before it reaches the bottom, altered as it falls by the organisms that intercept it at each depth. The plankton snow passes through a succession of eaters and decomposers, each one extracting what it can, releasing what it cannot use, passing the remainder downward to the next level of the water column and the next set of organisms waiting to receive it. By the time anything reaches the deep floor, it has been reduced to the finest residue carbon compounds stripped of their most easily available energy, mineral matter that the organisms of the upper water couldn't use, the occasional large body of a dead animal too large to be fully consumed on the way down. These large falls, a dead mosasaur, a dead plesiosaur, the shell-encased body of a giant ammonite, are events in the deep water ecosystem. When they arrive at the bottom, they are colonized immediately and completely by the organisms that specialize in processing this kind of windfall. Bacteria first, coating the surface of the body within hours, beginning the chemical work of decomposition. Then larger scavengers, attracted by the chemical plume, the bacteria release into the water above. Then, over days and weeks, a succession of organisms that consume each other, and the remains in an order determined by the chemistry of what is available at each stage. It is a complete ecosystem built on death, which is the oldest kind of ecosystem and the foundation of every other kind. Nothing in the sea is wasted. Everything that dies becomes the food for something living, And in this way, the carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus that make up the bodies of the things you have been watching today, the ammonites and the mosasaurs and the fish schools and the microscopic plankton, is never truly gone, only transformed, moved from one form into another, in a cycle that has been running for as long as life has been present in the sea, which is most of the history of life on Earth. Descend now into this deep central water. Let yourself sink from the sunlit upper zone into the transitional layer, the thermocline where the temperature drops noticeably and the light reduces to a faint blue-green quality that has lost most of the warmth of the surface. The fish here are different silver bodies with large eyes, adapted to the low light, their bodies compressed into shapes, optimized for the three-dimensional freedom of truly open water, where there is nothing to hide behind and no bottom to retreat to. The pressure here is higher than at the surface. Not dramatically higher, this sea is not deep enough for the extreme pressures of the abyssal ocean, but noticeably, pleasantly higher, a gentle all-directional compression that the deep water organisms have adapted to the same way shallow water organisms adapted to their own pressures, by building bodies that are in equilibrium with it, that do not experience it as pressure at all, but simply as the normal state of the world. You experience it, if you experience it at all, as a kind of fullness, a completeness of contact between you and the water, a sense that the water is more thoroughly present to your body than it was in the shallower zones above. The largest creatures of this sea favour the deep central basin, not because they need the depth, most of them surface regularly to breathe and could live anywhere in the sea, but because the open water gives them space to manoeuvre at the scale their bodies require, and because the deeper zones contain certain prey species that prefer the dim water, squid-like creatures that spend the daylight hours at depth and rise toward the surface at night, as their descendants in your own ocean do, conducting their daily vertical migration in response to the changing light levels and the different predator communities they encounter at different depths. The squid-like animals here are not quite what you might expect. They are belemnites, cephalopods related to the ammonites, but with an internal skeleton rather than an external shell. Their shape more cylindrical than coiled, their movement more like a squid's rapid jet propulsion than the ammonite's slow, buoyant drift. They hang in the dim water at this depth in loose aggregations during the day. Their internal guards, the hard cigar-shaped structures made of calcite that will be the most commonly preserved part of them in the rock record, invisible inside their soft bodies, detectable only as a slight increase in their mass and a subtle stiffness in their torpedo-shaped forms. Something very large is moving toward you from the east. You sense it before the water carries it to your perception in any more specific form, a change in the pressure, a subtle displacement, a pushing aside of water that your body reads as the approach of something with significant mass moving at a purposeful pace. Then it resolves out of the hazy, deeper water into something you can see, and it is large enough that seeing it takes a moment to complete, requires a scanning from one end to the other that makes you aware of the creature's scale in a way that a single first impression could not convey. It is a Tylosaurus, the largest kind of mosasaur, and this individual is among the larger individuals of that largest kind. Its head is over 1 meter long, blunt-nosed by mosasaur standards, the jaws lined with conical teeth that are each the size of an adult human thumb. The body stretches back from that head for 10, 11, 12 meters. It is difficult to be certain in the dim light of the deep basin before tapering to the vertically flattened tail that drives it through the water with a side-to-side sweep of immense power. The paddles are proportionally large on this animal, wide and flat, adjusting the animal's attitude in the water with the ease of something that has spent its entire life in three-dimensional space. The Tylosaurus is not hunting urgently. If it were hunting, it would be moving faster, its entire body more committed to the direction of pursuit. Instead, it moves at the long-distance travel pace, the energy-efficient cruise that covers ground steadily over hours, the speed that a 10-meter mosasaur needs to be at to cover its territory and keep itself fed over the course of a week or month. It is watching with those large forward-facing eyes, the tongue flickering constantly, the lateral line organs sensing the water pressure in every direction, building a continuous portrait of the sea around it that combines sight and chemistry and vibration into something like full awareness of the space it occupies. It sees you. Or rather, it perceives you in the way that such an animal perceives things, not with the focused intent of a predator identifying prey, because you don't register as prey. don't produce the chemical signals or the pressure waves or the visual profile of anything this animal has learned to hunt. You are an anomaly, a thing that is present but uncategorized, and the animal responds to anomalies in the way that well-fed apex predators respond to anomalies, with a brief increase in attention that quickly subsides into continued indifference. The tongue flickers toward you once, twice, reading the water around you for information. The large eye swivels in your direction. And then the animal's attention moves on, back to the larger territory of its patrol, and it passes you at a distance of perhaps 15 meters, close enough that the pressure wave of its passage reaches you as something you feel in your chest, a slow, deep pulse, like a heartbeat that belongs to something much larger than yourself. The Tylosaurus continues east, and you watch it go until the dim light swallows it, the dark shape diminishing and then gone, leaving behind only the slowly dispersing turbulence of its passage, and a memory that your mind holds with the careful reverence it applies to things that are too large and too ancient and too completely themselves to be held any other way. The deep water is quiet after the Tylosaurus passes. The smaller creatures that had positioned themselves at the edges of the large animal's path prudently distant, as small creatures tend to be when large predators are nearby, resume their own patterns of movement. The fish that had held very still begin to move again. The belemnites, which had descended slightly when the pressure wave of the large animal reached them, rise back to their preferred depth. The schools reconstitute themselves from the scattered individuals who had drifted to the margins. The deep basin returns to its ambient state, which is not silence but the low continuous hum of life processing itself at depth, the sound that the sea makes when it is simply being the sea. You are in the deepest water you have visited in this journey. The surface above is invisible, replaced by a faint brightening in the direction of up, not light exactly, but the memory of light, the last traces of the sun's energy that have filtered down this far and are still enough to create a gradient between up and down, still enough to tell you which way is which. Below you, the bottom is invisible too, down there in the real dark where the pressures and the cold and the chemistry are different from anything in the lighter water above. You are suspended between the surface and the floor, between the light and the dark, between the world of the living sea and the world of the rock that remembers it. This is the exact middle of the water column, and from here you can feel both boundaries equally, the warmth above and the cool below, the light above and the dark below, the living present above and the geological past below. The belemnites drift past you in their loose aggregation, their cylindrical bodies oriented horizontally, their ink sacs and siphons invisible at this light level but present, all the machinery of their cephalopod existence running quietly inside those torpedo forms. One of them passes close enough that you could touch it, if touching were possible here, close enough to see the fine line where the mantle meets the head, the arrangement of the tentacles folded against the body in rest position, the small dark eye that tracks you as the animal passes, registers you, and then moves on. This middle place is where you have been all along, between waking and sleep, between the world you know and the world that was, between the present moment and the 80-million-year-old afternoon in which you have been drifting. You belong to both. You belong to neither. You are passing through in the way that all things pass through the middle of the moment they inhabit, on the way from one thing to another, in no particular hurry to arrive. The water holds you. The deep quiet holds you. The enormous ancient world holds you as gently as it holds everything else in it, without preference, without condition, without the need for you to be anything other than exactly what you are. Rest here, in this suspended middle place. The surface world is far above, with its light and its pterosaurs and its storms. The floor is far below, with its sediment and its buried shells and its slow chemistry. Here, in the middle, there is only the water and the dim light, and the belemnites drifting past, and the enormous patience of a sea that has been here long before you, and will be here long after, that has no opinion about your presence or your absence, that simply is warm and dark and full and ancient, in the most complete and sufficient way that anything can simply be. The current is taking you north now, or rather, you are choosing to go north. Choosing is perhaps too precise a word for what happens when a drifting mind decides to go somewhere, which is more like a leaning than a decision, more like the way a dream shifts location than the way a waking person plans a journey. You lean north, and the current accommodates, and the sea carries you in that direction at the patient pace of the water's own northward drift. The sea stretches in this direction for hundreds of miles, narrowing as it goes, the two shores converging as the continental margins approach each other in the north until the sea is no longer a wide basin but a channel, a seaway in the most literal sense, water moving through a corridor between land masses that are still drifting toward the configuration that your own time will know but have not yet arrived there. The northern end of this seaway is open to the ocean, the boreal sea, the cold northern waters that in this warm greenhouse world are not nearly as cold as the northern oceans of your own time, but are cooler than the warm, shallow central basin where you have spent most of this drift. As you move north, you notice the change. The water temperature decreases slightly, still warm by the standards of your own ocean, still comfortable, still holding you in the thermal embrace that has characterized the entire journey, but measurably different from the water of the central basin, and the light is different too. You are moving toward higher latitudes, and at higher latitudes the sun is lower in the sky even at this warm greenhouse period of the Earth's history, and a lower sun sends its light through more atmosphere and at a more oblique angle to the water's surface, and the result is light that enters the sea less directly, that penetrates less deeply, that has a cooler, more grey-blue quality than the warm amber of the southern reaches. This change in light changes the world you see around you. The warm golden haze of the central basin gives way to something clearer, more blue-tinted, the kind of light that you associate with the deep ocean of your own time, or with the sea in the colder months of a temperate year. It is still beautiful, differently beautiful, with the beauty of clear cold water rather than the beauty of warm amber water, and the creatures in it are adapted to it, with the same completeness that all the creatures of this sea are adapted to their own particular zone. The organisms here are more like the open ocean species that will dominate the seas of the colder periods of the future. Larger, in some cases the cooler, nutrient-richer water of the northern zone supports greater primary productivity in the form of phytoplankton, which supports greater populations of the small creatures that feed on phytoplankton, which supports greater populations of the things that feed on those, in a cascade of productivity that makes the northern parts of any ocean more productive in terms of total biomass than the warm, clear, nutrient-poor tropical waters to the south. There are fish here of a kind you have not seen in the southern basin, longer-bodied, built for sustained swimming in the open water, rather than for the quick sprints and schooling behavior of the tropical fish. They move through the northern water with an efficiency that speaks of long journeys. These fish may travel hundreds of miles in the course of a year, following the seasonal patterns of prey distribution that the changing light and temperature create in the northern part of the sea. They have been doing this for as many generations as the sea has existed in its current form, which is many thousands of generations, many tens of thousands of years, enough time to inscribe these patterns into the biology of the fish so deeply that the fish do not know they are following a pattern at all. The mosasaurs are here too, of course. This is their sea, every part of it, and the largest individuals favour the northern waters where the prey is most abundant. You see several in the distance, recognisable even at long range by their characteristic swimming motion and their size, and one closer, perhaps 20 metres away, a middle-sized animal whose dark back blends with the darker northern water more completely than it blended with the lighter water of the south. It pays you no attention. You are still the invisible presence, the unclassifiable anomaly that the sensory apparatus of this sea does not know how to process. The northern water has a different smell. You know this without being able to smell it directly, the memory of how northern ocean water smells, the particular combination of brine and organic matter, and the cold clarity that the ocean develops in its less heated regions, carries into your perception here as a quality of the place, rather than a direct sensory input. Cold water holds dissolved gases more effectively than warm water does, and so the northern reaches of this sea are richer in the oxygen and carbon dioxide that drive the productivity of the upper water. The phytoplankton bloom more enthusiastically here. The food web is denser. A group of smaller plesiosaurs, a type that will eventually be classified as a polycotylid, with proportionally shorter necks than the elasmosaurids of the south and larger, broader heads designed for catching larger prey, crosses your path moving from east to west, cutting through the water in the steady, coordinated movement that suggests these animals sometimes aggregate in loose groups, not the coordinated pack hunting of wolves or orcas, but a looser kind of togetherness that may provide advantages in finding large concentrations of prey. They move past without pausing, each one carrying its own particular awareness of the water around it, each one present in its own way, and then they are gone into the western reaches of the northern sea. The light here, lower in the sky even at midday, creates shadows that are longer and more distinct than the shadows of the southern sun. The shafts of light that penetrate the surface are more angled, more dramatic, falling through the water like the light through tall windows in a building that has no roof, illuminating long diagonal corridors through the water that shift as the clouds pass above, and the angle of the sun changes in its lower arc across the northern sky. Each shaft is a different density of light, a different quality of visibility, and the fish move through and between them in patterns that seem almost choreographed, not because they are, but because the light itself organizes the space, and the fish organize themselves in relation to the light. You are drifting in a shaft of northern light now. It falls on you from above and slightly to the south, at the angle of the early afternoon sun over a latitude somewhere in the equivalent of what will become southern Canada. The light is clear and not quite warm, cool enough to have a quality you might call fresh, as if it has been cleaned by its longer passage through the cooler atmosphere of the north. In this light, every detail of the water around you is sharply defined. The suspended particles and the small organisms and the distant shapes of fish are more visible in this clear northern water than they were in the warm, hazy water of the south. What you see, looking around in this clear light, is the sea at its most legible. Here you can trace the relationships between things more directly than in the south, where the warmth and the haze softened everything into a general impression of density and life. Here individual animals are distinct, their movements comprehensible, their relationships to each other and to the space they occupy, clear enough to read like the pages of a book, written in a language you have never formally studied but can somehow follow. The book says, "This is how a sea works. This is how energy moves from sunlight to plankton to fish to predator, and back to the water, in the form of dissolved nutrients that feed the next generation of plankton. This is how the chemistry of the air and the sea are linked, with carbon dioxide taken from the atmosphere by the phytoplankton and held in their tissues and eventually carried to the seafloor in their bodies when they die and sink. Removing carbon from the atmosphere in a process so slow and so massive and so continuous that it shapes the climate of the entire planet. This is how a healthy ecosystem looks when it has not been disrupted by anything more significant than a storm or a seasonal shift in current, complete, balanced. Each part adjusted to the others over generations, each part playing its role in a larger system that has no management and no design, but functions nonetheless with the precision of the best designed machines. The Northern Sea is older feeling than the South, not because it has existed longer, the whole sea is the same age, but because the lower light and the cooler water and the sterner quality of the northern landscape give it a gravitas that the warm tropical South does not quite have. This is the quality of a place that works in serious conditions, that produces abundance not through the easy generosity of warmth and light, but through the patient mining of cold deep water, the churning up of nutrients from below, the concentrated productivity of short, bright seasons, followed by long, dim ones. But even here, even in this more austere version of the same sea, the water is warm enough and the life is dense enough and the drift is slow enough that there is nothing urgent, nothing that presses on you, nothing that requires response. The Northern Sea accepts you the same way the Southern Sea did, with the indifference of something that has no category for you and therefore no response prepared, simply allowing you to be present in the way that all things are present that move through a world without disturbing it. You are drifting in the shaft of northern light, in the cool, clear water, in the ancient sea, in the deep time that holds everything here with the patience of stone. The light falls on you from above. The water holds you from every side. The current moves slowly northward. You are going nowhere, which is the only place that matters right now. Let the current bring you back south, and then let it carry you eastward, toward the other shore of this sea, the one you have not yet visited, the one that is different in character from the western shore, in ways that are worth arriving at slowly and noticing carefully. The western shore, you remember, was dynamic and young. The mountains building to the west sent rivers carrying sediment and fresh water into the sea from the west, and the result was a turbulent margin, mudflats and estuaries, and brackish transitional zones and forests of relatively new growth crowding the land above the waterline. The hadrosaurs moved through those forests with the energy of animals in a productive, rapidly changing environment. The eastern shore is different. The land on the east side of this sea is ancient. The Canadian Shield, the billion-year-old granite and metamorphic bedrock that forms the foundation of the eastern continent, has been eroded over those billions of years to a state of remarkable flatness. Not dead flatness, not the flat of a perfectly smooth surface, but the flat of something that was once mountains and has been worn down by so long a period of erosion that the distinction between mountain and valley has almost been smoothed out. The low, ancient landscape drains toward the sea in broad, shallow rivers that carry very little sediment. The material has long since been eroded and carried away, and so the eastern margin of this sea is not muddy but sandy, not brackish, but barely diluted from the full salt of the open water, not dynamic but stable in the way that very old things are stable. The water approaching the eastern shore is clearer than the western margin. Less sediment in suspension means better visibility, and better visibility means different communities of organisms, different strategies for living. The eastern shallow water is dominated by creatures that rely on sight, and by plants that can establish themselves in stable sandy sediment rather than being constantly buried by new mud. The coral-like organisms that build calcium carbonate structures, not the same corals you know from your own ocean, but convergent structures built by different groups of organisms that discover the same basic engineering principle, are more prevalent here, building low mounds and rough forests of calcareous material that provide shelter for dozens of species that would not otherwise find purchase in the open sandy bottom. Descend to the eastern shallows now. The water is perhaps 10 meters deep here, clear enough that you can see the sandy bottom below with perfect distinctness. The ripple marks left by the wave action, the scattered shells of dead bivalves gleaming white against the pale sand, the occasional shadow of a fish moving along the bottom searching for the small crustaceans that burrow just below the surface. The light is not amber here, but something more nearly green-blue, the clear water filtering it differently than the more particulate-laden water of the Western Basin. A small crustacean moves across the sand in front of you, sideways, in the characteristic motion of the crab-like animals that have inhabited the sandy margins of seas since before the Cretaceous. This one is perhaps the size of your palm, its shell a pale cream colour that nearly matches the sand it travels across. It pauses, as crabs do, with a sudden complete stillness that makes it nearly invisible, and then moves again in another burst of sideways energy. It is hunting the even smaller creatures that live in the sand, and it is in turn hunted by the larger fish that move through this shallow zone, and the fish are hunted by the mosasaurs that cruise the boundary between the shallows and the deeper water offshore. The eastern shore above the waterline is different from the forest of the west. Here the land is so flat and so ancient that it drains poorly, and the result is a landscape of shallow wetlands, low scrub forest, and open areas where the water table is so close to the surface that only the most water-tolerant plants can establish themselves. Horsetails of enormous size grow in the wetter areas, 10 meters tall, their jointed stems visible above the waterline from where you float in the shallows. Ferns of many kinds crowd the margins between wetland and drier ground. And above these lower plants, a canopy of the older trees, not the flowering trees that are beginning to colonize the western forests, but the gymnosperm trees that have dominated the land for longer than the flowering plants have existed, conifers, cycads, and the ginkgos that will survive almost unchanged into your own time, their distinctive fan-shaped leaves producing a canopy that filters the eastern light into a particular shade of green that falls on the water's surface in the morning hours when the eastern sun is behind the land. The animals of the eastern shore are different too, in their own way. The same hadrosaurs that browse the western forests are present here. They cross the sea's margins seasonally, following the patterns of plant growth that the different environments offer at different times of year. But here they share the land with different dinosaurs, animals adapted to the drier, more open landscape of the ancient eastern terrain. There are smaller ornithopod dinosaurs, bipedal, fast, feeding on the low-growing plants of the wetland margins with the quick darting movements of animals that are more vulnerable to predation than the large hadrosaurs, and have therefore evolved a different relationship with their environment. Constant alertness, quick reaction, the ability to sprint over the flat open ground of the eastern plain at speeds the predators of this region can barely match. And there are ankylosaurs, Armored animals, broad and low-slung, their backs covered in the bony plates and spikes that give them a protection so complete that even the large predators of this period are reluctant to attack them directly. They move slowly across the eastern wetlands in the ponderous way that very well-defended animals move, when they have no need to hurry, each step deliberate. The heavy tail, with its club of fused bone sweeping slightly from side to side as a passive warning to anything that might be considering the tactical error of approaching too closely. They graze on the low vegetation with the same grinding, methodical patience that the hadrosaurs bring to the higher canopy. These are animals with the same fundamental approach to the problem of being large and plant-eating, in a world full of things that eat meat, which is to be armoured, or to be tall, or to be fast, or to be numerous, and the ankylosaurs have chosen armour so completely and successfully that their body plan will survive in the fossil record as one of the great success stories of the Mesozoic. From the eastern shallows you can see the ankylosaurs moving along the shore in the late afternoon light. They are not concerned with the sea. The water is not their territory, not their resource, not part of the world they navigate. They move along the edge of it as along the edge of any other terrain feature, noting it, working around it, taking a path that runs parallel to the waterline at a distance that keeps their feet dry. Each footfall on the soft eastern soil leaves a print, a broad, shallow impression that the water table fills almost immediately, blurring the track into the landscape within minutes. These animals pass through the world without trying to leave a mark, and the world accepts their passage without making a fuss about it. The afternoon light on the eastern shore is long and level, the sun to the west casting the shadow of the landscape across the shallow water in horizontal bands, alternating the sandy bottom between the bright light of the unshaded water and the slightly dimmer light of the shadow zones where the eastern trees interrupt the direct sun. In these shadow zones, the fish hover in the cooler water, resting in the way that fish rest, never fully still, always maintaining position against the current with the same muscular micro-adjustments that characterize everything a fish does, but with less urgency, less directed movement, something that functions as rest, without sharing any of the qualities of rest that a land animal would recognize. You float in the shadow zone, in the alternating light and dark of the eastern shallows, and watch the floor of the sea below you, with the patient attention of a mind that has been in this place long enough to stop looking for things to happen and simply settle into what is. A sea cucumber, the body plan is ancient enough to be present here, a soft cylinder of muscle moving across the sand by hydraulic extension and contraction, the tube feet underneath it gripping the sand in a sequence that produces a slow forward motion, makes its way across the bottom with the unhurried thoroughness of an animal that has been cleaning organic matter from seafloors for hundreds of millions of years and has no reason to change the way. It does it. The eastern sea is slower than the western sea. The western margin, with its fresh mountain water and its dynamic mudflats and its rapidly building forests, has an energy to it, the energy of new growth, of building, of systems that are rapidly accumulating complexity. The eastern margin is the patience of something already complete, already settled, already at rest in the deepest sense of the word. The ancient bedrock under your feet is at rest. The old flat land above the waterline is at rest. Even the trees, the conifers and the ginkgos that have been doing the same thing in the same way for tens of millions of years have a quality of settled permanence that the newer flowering forests of the West do not yet possess. Let that settled permanence move through you. The eastern shore is offering you something that the rest of this journey has been building toward, without quite arriving at a complete, unambiguous, geologically certified stillness. This is what it feels like to be something very old in a world that is also very old. This is what it feels like to have finished becoming and to simply be. The water is still, the light is long, the floor of the sea is pale and clear and perfectly visible below you, each grain of sand distinct, each small creature on it precisely itself, each shadow from above a clear and unambiguous shape. There is nothing complicated about any of this. It is only the world, at rest, at the end of a long afternoon, in an eastern shallow sea 80 million years in the past. You are at rest too. There is no distinction between you and the rest that surrounds you now. The warm water and the amber eastern light, and the slow movement of the sea floor's inhabitants, and the distant sound of ankylosaur footfalls on the muddy ground above the waterline. All of this is one thing, and you are part of it, and the part of you that's been trying to observe and describe and understand is slowly becoming unnecessary. Everything is already understood here. Everything has already been understood here for longer than your language has been able to form questions. The surface of this sea is a theatre. Below the surface, where you have been drifting, the world is continuous and largely undivided. The same water, the same general ambient conditions, the same fundamental quality of existence, varying slowly across distance and depth, but without the sharp categorical divisions that the world above the surface presents. But the surface itself, and the sky above it, runs through a daily drama of light and weather and wind that is as varied and as continuously changing as anything in the world below is stable and continuous. Drift upward now toward that surface. Not to leave the water. You are not ready to leave the water, and the water is not ready to release you, but to be close to it, to float in the top few meters where the drama of the sky is most directly felt, where the weather of the upper world leaves its impression on the water most immediately. The morning clarity has been building towards something all day. You felt it as you drifted through the northern water, a particular tension in the air above the surface, a quality of the light that was brighter and harder than the softer light of the previous afternoon, the kind of clarity that comes before a change in the weather. The atmosphere over a warm inland sea in the Cretaceous summer is not a stable thing. The water evaporates continuously, adding moisture to the air above, and that moist air rises in convective columns as it warms through the day, rising until it cools enough to condense, forming the clouds that build every afternoon over the warm central basin. But today the convection is stronger than usual. The column of warm, moist air that began rising from the sea surface in the late morning has been building for hours, accumulating mass and energy as water vapor condenses at its top and releases the latent heat that was stored when it evaporated, and that latent heat has powered further ascent, and the further ascent has drawn more warm, moist air from the surface below, and the whole system has been feeding on itself in the way that atmospheric systems sometimes do when the conditions are right. What is building above the surface now is a storm, not a hurricane. This sea is at the wrong latitude and the wrong temperature for the kind of organized rotating structure that becomes a hurricane. But a deep convective storm, a vertical tower of cloud that has been growing for hours and is now perhaps 12 kilometers high, its top flattening into the characteristic anvil shape, where the rising air runs into the stable cold air of the upper atmosphere and can rise no further, spreading outward instead into that flat anvil crown. From below the surface, from where you drift in the top few meters of water, you cannot see the full height of this cloud. You can only see its base, and the base is dark, very dark, the purplish-grey colour of a sky that is carrying more water than it can hold in gaseous form, and is in the process of deciding how to set it down. The light changes. The amber of the afternoon has been replaced by something darker, not the soft grey of overcast, but the bruised purple-yellow that comes when a very large storm cloud is positioned between you and the sun, filtering the light through tens of kilometres of moisture-laden cloud in a way that extracts the ordinary colours and leaves only this particular quality of pre-storm light. It is one of the most distinctive colours in nature. It has no exact equivalent in any other condition. From below the water's surface, you see it as a change in the quality of the surface itself. The shimmer becomes a different kind of shimmer, the light entering the water darker and more diffuse, the amber replaced by something more complex. Then the wind picks up. You can feel this as a change in the behaviour of the surface above you. The smooth swells that have been rolling through all afternoon are replaced by shorter, steeper chop, the surface roughening as the wind increases and the waves build from the friction of air moving rapidly over water. From below the surface, this change in wave pattern creates a different quality of water movement around you. Instead of the slow, long undulation of the open swell, the water begins to move in shorter, more confused patterns, the energy arriving from multiple directions as the choppy surface transmits its complexity downward. The rain starts. You know this from the sound from a particular softening and texturing of the surface above you, a layer of fine disturbance covering the entire surface simultaneously in a way that the wave action does not produce, each raindrop creating a brief dome of disturbed water as it impacts, thousands of them every second across the entire visible area of the surface above. The sound of this, transmitted through the water, is a soft, continuous hiss, different in quality from all other sounds this sea makes, unique and immediately recognizable as the sound of rain, There is something deeply restful about being below rain. The rain is a disturbance, a source of noise and turbulence. On the surface, but 2 meters below the surface, the sound of rain is a soothing white noise, the individual impacts averaged into a continuous soft percussion that is unlike any other sound. It is the sound of the sky making contact with the sea, the sound of the atmosphere and the ocean exchanging water in the direction that will eventually return it to the sky through evaporation after this storm has passed and the sun has returned. The lightning, when it comes, is first felt as a change in the electrical properties of the water, though you have no instrument to measure this. The change is perceptible in some way that is not quite sensation, not quite perception, just a knowing that the air above the water has become charged in a way that it was not charged before. Then the flash, visible even below the surface, not as the bright searing light it is in the air, but as a sudden general brightening of the water above you, everything illuminated for a fraction of a second in a cold blue-white that has no warmth in it, no amber, nothing of the ordinary quality of underwater light. It is the colour of something instantaneous, something that is already finished in the moment you begin to perceive it. The thunder that follows is most profoundly felt rather than heard. It arrives as a pressure wave through the water, a deep compression that moves through your chest before your perception of it as sound has time to form. It is the sound of the sky resolving something it had been building toward all afternoon. It is the sound of release. The storm passes through. Storms over warm inland seas are typically fast-moving. The convective cells that produce them are driven upward by the heat, but the upper-level winds carry them in a preferred direction, and what passes overhead is the anvil-shaped tower, and its rain curtain moving at the speed of the wind, arriving in darkness and thunder and departing as the thunder recedes and the light begins to return behind the storm. The light behind a storm is different from the light before it. Before the storm, the light was hard and bright and accumulating. After the storm, the light is washed, cleaned, stripped of the haze that the morning heat built up, reduced to a pure quality that only the passage of a great deal of water through the atmosphere can produce. The surface above you brightens and clarifies, and the light that comes through it is the most transparent it has been all day, not amber, not green, not blue exactly, but something approaching all three at once. A clean quality of illumination that makes every detail visible with a sharpness that the earlier conditions did not quite achieve. In this post-storm light, the sea around you is extraordinarily clear. The churning of the storm has mixed the water slightly, bringing some deeper, colder water toward the surface, and distributing the surface water into the column below. And in this mixed, slightly cooled, very clear water, you can see further than before in every direction. The fish that took cover at depth during the storm are returning to the surface zone. The plesiosaurs and mosasaurs that rode out the rough weather in the deeper, calmer water below are also ascending, taking advantage of the post-storm clarity and the fish that are concentrating in the newly mixed and nutrient-rich surface layer. Everything is awake. Everything is taking advantage of the moment after the storm, which is one of the most productive moments in the cycle of a productive sea. The turbulence has redistributed resources. The rain has freshened the surface slightly. The lightning has produced a small amount of fixed nitrogen, a nutrient that the sea constantly needs in order to fuel the growth of the phytoplankton that feeds everything else. The storm has been a disruption and a gift simultaneously, which is what storms always are in a healthy ecosystem, not disasters but events. Not emergencies, but part of the pattern. You drift in the post-storm clarity, in the washed light, in the water that is slightly cooler and more mixed than it was before. The world feels clean. Not clean in the way of something that has been scrubbed, but clean in the way of something that has been refreshed, in the same world it was before the storm, but with the accumulated haze of the afternoon removed, the ordinary miraculousness of the sea visible again, in its full detail. The sun descends toward the western horizon. Another afternoon, becoming another evening, another day in the Cretaceous passing without anyone recording it, without anyone knowing it was happening, without any observer except the anonymous drifting presence that you are and have been and will continue to be, for as long as this warm water holds you, let it hold you. The post-storm sea is the quietest version of itself. The waves have settled back to the long, smooth swell. The last of the thunder has faded into the eastern distance. The sky is the clean, pale blue of a sky that has spent all its weather for the day, and is now simply resting, waiting for night. You have been in this sea for a long time now. Not in the counting sense, not hours or days or any unit of time that your ordinary life uses, but in the sense of having moved through a great deal of it, having visited its different zones and its different hours and its different characters, having been held by its water and illuminated by its light, and carried by its currents through a world that does not know you are here and would not change its behaviour if it did. In all that time, nothing here has been impatient. That is perhaps the deepest thing this journey has offered, and it is offered silently, without emphasis, in the way that the sea offers most things not as a lesson, not as a gift, not as something directed toward anyone in particular, but as a simple fact of the world you are in. The ammonites that drift through this water were not hurrying. They have been drifting through water like this, in some form or another, for more than 300 million years before this moment, and they will drift through water like this for many millions of years more, before the catastrophe that ends the Cretaceous removes them from the world entirely. Each generation of ammonites lived its complete life, coiled its shell, hunted its prey, reproduced and died at the same patient pace, in the same warm water, making the same contribution to the sediment that fell to the floor of the sea above the ancient bedrock. Not one of them was in a hurry. Not one of them experienced its own life as insufficient or too slow or in need of acceleration. The mosasaurs hunted at the pace of things that have enough to eat and enough space to move and no reason to do anything in a rush. The large Tylosaurus you watched in the deep central basin was moving at exactly the speed its body was built for, the efficient cruise speed that minimizes energy expenditure over long distances, that keeps the animal fed without exhausting it. That is neither fast nor slow, but simply the right pace for a 12-meter animal maintaining a territory in a warm, shallow sea. The hadrosaurs on the western shore ate at the pace of large herbivores everywhere, and in every time methodically, with the grinding patience of creatures whose food requires extensive processing before it can be used, whose digestive systems need time to work through the biomass they consume, whose lives are organized around the twin poles of eating enough and not being eaten, both of which they address with the same unhurried thoroughness. Even the geology is patient. The mountains to the west are building at a pace of millimeters per year. The sediment is falling to the sea floor at a rate of fractions of a millimeter per year. The continental plate is drifting toward its eventual position at a rate of centimeters per year. These are all motions that happen constantly, continuously, without pause, at a pace that nothing alive in this sea can perceive. They are the extinctions, the apparently faster events of biological life play out, but they are not actually slower in any meaningful sense. They are simply operating at a different scale of time. The way the rotation of the galaxy operates at a different scale of time than the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, which operates at a different scale than the daily rotation, which operates at a different scale than the heartbeat. You are at the heartbeat end of this scale, your own heartbeat, right now, in the body you have left behind, in the bed or chair or wherever you are lying. As your mind drifts through this ancient sea, that heartbeat is the fastest thing in the hierarchy of time that this moment contains. It is beating perhaps once per second, and each beat moves blood through a body that has been evolving for the same amount of time as everything else in this sea has been evolving, which is all of the time, which is the whole history of life, which is 4 billion years. 4 billion years. The ammonite in front of you is the product of 4 billion years. The mosasaur is the product of 4 billion years. The hadrosaur on the shore is the product of 4 billion years. And the heart beating in your chest is also the product of 4 billion years, a pumping muscle derived from the same ancestral cellular machinery that built the first multicellular organisms in the Precambrian Sea, refined and modified through every step of the evolutionary journey, from simple to complex, from water-breathing to air-breathing, from cold to warm, from small to large, from other things to you. You share this sea not just as a visitor, but as a distant relative of everything in it. Your ancestry reaches back through the mammals to the early amniotes, to the amphibians, to the early tetrapods that first walked on land, to the lobe-finned fish from which those tetrapods descended. And the lobe-finned fish are not so different, at their foundation, from the other fish in this sea. And the fish are not so different, at their foundation, from the invertebrates. And the invertebrates are not so different, at their foundation, from the single-celled organisms that began the whole project of making this water alive. You belong here, in the deepest sense. not as a visitor from the future. That framing is too simple, too narrative, too much about time, as a direction of travel rather than a dimension of depth. You belong here the way an oak tree belongs in a forest that grew from the same soil that grew the first forests. Not because it is the same tree, not because it has not changed, but because the thread of continuity is unbroken. Every generation in your ancestry was alive in some sea or some land, breathing some air, converting sunlight into growth and movement, doing the one thing that life does, which is persist. You are the persistence of life, here, now, in this sea. You are 80 million years newer than most of the things around you, and you are also the continuous descendant of things older than any of them, older than the mosasaurs, older than the ammonites, older even than the ancestral forms that gave rise to the lineages of animals you have been watching today. You are very new and very old at the same time, the way the river is new water and old riverbed simultaneously, the way the flame is new combustion and old candle simultaneously. Let this sit in you without trying to hold its full weight. It is too heavy to hold fully. It is meant to be carried lightly, the way you carry the fact of the night sky without cataloguing every star, the way you carry the fact of your own body without knowing the function of every enzyme. The understanding does not need to be complete to be real. The connection does not need to be mapped to be felt. You are here. The sea is here. The 80 million years of deep time are here, rolled out around you in every direction, present in the rock below and the water around you, and the sky that the sun has almost reached the edge of above. This is the world in its patient, unhurried, fully complete state. It requires nothing from you. It offers everything to you. It asks only that you be present in it, which you are, which you have been, which you will continue to be for as long as you are willing to stay. The light is deep gold now, the true colour of the evening sun setting behind the western mountains that are still building themselves out of the land, casting long horizontal shadows across the surface of the sea that you can see from below as alternating bands of richer and less rich light. The surface has a warmth to it in this evening light that it did not have even at noon. This is the warmth of accumulated heat, of a day's worth of solar energy stored in the water and radiating back, the sea giving to the evening what it received from the morning. You are receiving it too. The warmth enters you from every direction, from the water around you, from the light above you, from the simple biological fact of being alive and warm-blooded in a warm world. It is a complete warmth. It does not leave any part of you cold. It fills you the way sleep fills a tired body from the outside in, from the periphery toward the centre, until there is nothing left that is not warm, nothing left that is not at rest. The evening is settling in, the colours are deepening, the creatures of the sea are making their evening adjustments, the daytime hunters ascending toward the surface for their last feeding of the light, the night creatures beginning to stir at the edges of the daylit world, the entire vast community of living things running through the same transition it has run through every evening since this sea has existed. You are running through your own transition, the one from waking to sleep, from awareness to rest, from the world of thought and attention and observation to the other world, the one without edges, without narrative, without the need for anything to make sense. The water is warm, the evening light is gold, the sea goes on forever in every direction, full of ancient life, patient beyond measure, asking nothing of you except the simplest possible thing, to rest. You are still here. This is worth acknowledging, in the quiet way that things worth acknowledging are acknowledged in the moments before sleep, not with fanfare, not with analysis, but with a simple recognition. You are still here, in this warm water, in this ancient sea, in the last of the long afternoon light, and you have not needed to go anywhere or do anything or be anyone, and the sea has held you through all of it without question. Descend now, gently. Not to the deepest water, not to the geological patience of the bedrock, not to the cold dark of the abyss, but to the middle depth, to the place between the surface and the floor where the temperature is perfect and the light is amber, and the current moves so slowly it is barely distinguishable from stillness. You have been in this place before. It is where you started. It is where the journey, having made its great slow circle through the northern reaches and the eastern shore, and the storm and the night, returns you now. The middle depth. Here the water is neither the cool, clear, productive water of the northern basin, nor the warm, murky, productive water of the western margin. Here it is simply warm, simply amber, simply present. The organisms around you are the same ones that have been here all along, the ammonites drifting in the current, the fish schools banking and turning in their silver choreography, the distant silhouettes of the larger creatures against the lighter water above. Everything is the same as when you arrived. The sea has not changed. The world has not changed. Havinim, the only thing that has changed is you, and the change is this. You know now, in a way you did not know when you arrived, that you belong here, not as a permanent resident, not as an animal that evolved to live in Cretaceous water, but as a mind that needed to be held by something patient and ancient and enormous, and found the right thing. Let your eyes close. Or let the mental act of observation that has been doing the work of eyes close, ease, release. You do not need to see anything more. Everything that is here will still be here when you open them again in seconds or hours or whatever interval the sleep that is coming needs. The ammonites will still be drifting. The mosasaurs will still be patrolling. The sediment will still be falling from above, adding its fraction of a millimeter to the record that the rock will keep for 80 million years. None of it requires your observation to continue. The sea does not need a witness. It never has. It was doing all of this. The ammonites and the mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs and the schools of silverfish and the bioluminescent nights and the post-storm clarity for millions of years before any creature existed that could observe it and recognize it as remarkable. The remarkableness was always there. It was simply unmarked, uncelebrated, complete in itself without the addition of any consciousness to appreciate it. And it will continue after you have drifted back to wherever dreamers go when they have finished with a dream. The Cretaceous sea will continue. It will run through the same daily cycles for tens of millions of years more, the light and the dark, the storms and the calm, the spawning of the ammonites and the hunting of the mosasaurs, and the patient accumulation of the chalk until the sea level drops, and the climate shifts, and the basin drains, and the land is exposed, and the fossils begin their long wait for the geologists of a future that neither the sea nor anything in it can imagine. But that is the future. This is now. And now the water is warm, the light is amber, the current is barely moving, and there is nothing in the sea around you that requires any response from you, except the one response that the whole journey has been leading you toward. The release of the last thin thread of attention that has been keeping you here at the surface of awareness. The letting go of the need to observe or understand or remember. Let it go. The thread is very thin now. It has been thinning since you first entered this water, since the first amber light fell over you, and the first warm current carried you, and the first ammonite drifted past without noticing you. Each chapter of this journey has taken a little more of the tension from the thread, eased a little more of the need to be alert, replaced a little more of the waking mind's busy activity, with the simple act of being present in a world that requires nothing from you. The thread is very nearly gone now. You can feel the difference between holding it and releasing it as almost no difference at all. The water will hold you either way. The warmth will hold you either way. The ancient sea will keep its patient amber-lit vigil whether you are watching or not. The ammonite drifts past you one more time. Its shell catches the last of the afternoon light and holds it for a moment in a bronze flash. There and then gone, turned away into the amber water and lost to view. It is complete in itself. It does not know you are here. It does not know that in 80 million years a mind will come backward through time to watch it drift in this water and find something in that watching that the ordinary world could not provide. It is simply an ammonite, in its sea, in its time, going about its ancient business. You are simply a mind, in your body, in your time, going about the ancient business of sleep. These two things are happening simultaneously, separated by 80 million years of the patience of rock and the patience of time and the patience of the deep earth that holds everything, holds it all, holds the Cretaceous sea, and the mind that is drifting through the memory of it, with the same geological indifference, the same geological gentleness, the same geological certainty that everything held will eventually settle into its final resting place. Your resting place is here, in the warmth, in the amber, in the slow drift of the current that is taking you nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, that has no destination and needs none, that moves because water has always moved, because the planet turns and the sun warms and the winds blow and the rain falls and the rivers flow and the sea fills and empties and fills again in the great patient cycle that has been running since before anything alive existed to. Observe it and will run long after. Everything currently alive has become the rock that the future will remember it by. The warmth is complete now. The light is very dim. The amber of an evening sky filtered through many meters of warm water, reduced to something that is barely light but cannot quite be called dark. You are in the last zone before darkness. You are in the place where the world goes quiet. The sea goes quiet. The current slows to nothing. The amber dims to the warm dark. Everything is held. Everything is still. The ancient world turns slowly beneath you in the dark, patient and enormous and at rest. And you are part of its rest. And the rest is deep, and the deep is warm, and the warm is the oldest comfort there is. Sleep now. The water will hold you. It always has. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The sea is still there. Even now, as you drift toward the edge of sleep, the Cretaceous Sea is still there, not as a place you can return to, not as a destination, but as a depth. A depth that exists inside the fact of the world, inside the rock that the sea became, inside the fossil record that the rock contains, inside the understanding that everything alive today carries the inheritance of everything that lived before it. You carry it too. In your body, in your chemistry, in the ancient cellular machinery that runs in every cell of your blood and brain, and the slow musculature of your sleeping heart, the sea is in you. It has always been in you. You came from it, in the longest sense of came from, not in a lifetime, not in a generation, but in the deep time that connects the first living cells in the first warm ocean to everything alive today. You are warm, you are held, you are drifting. The amber light is very faint now, barely a memory of light, a warmth in the water rather than a brightness. The ammonites have settled to their resting depth. The mosasaurs are moving in slow circles in the dark. The floor of the sea is accumulating its fraction of a millimeter of chalk, as it does every night, as it has done for millions of nights before this one. The world breathes. Out and in and out again. The current moves through the water in the way that breath moves through a sleeping body slowly, continuously, without any need for attention or direction, simply the world doing what the world does when the pressure of the day has been set aside. Your breath is doing the same thing. Slow, even, without effort, in and out in the rhythm that your body settled into long before your mind arrived to notice it, in the rhythm that will continue long after your mind has finished noticing anything. The water is warm, the dark is warm, the world is very old and very large and very quiet. Sleep as deep as the Cretaceous Sea, rest as old as the rock beneath it. You are held, you are home, you are completely, finally at rest. If you like this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.